You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. It's the Mueller Report. This is page 91. Although Clovis claimed to have no recollection of attending the TAG summit, Papadopoulos remembered discussing Russia and a foreign policy trip with Clovis and Fairs during the event. Papadopoulos' recollection is consistent with emails sent before and after the TAG summit. The pre-summit messages included a July 11, 2016 email in which Fairs suggested Papadopoulos the day after the summit to chat, and a July 12th message in the same chain in which Fairs advised Papadopoulos that other summit attendees, quote, are very nervous about Russia, so be aware, end quote. 10 days after the summit, Papadopoulos sent an email to Mifsud listing Fairs and Clovis as other participants in a potential meeting at the London Academy of Diplomacy. Finally, Papadopoulos' recollection is also consistent with handwritten notes from a journal that he kept at that time. Now we're going to page 92. Those notes, which are reprinted in part below, appear to refer to potential 2016 meetings in London with the representatives of the office of Putin and suggest that Fairs, Clovis, and Papadopoulos would attend without the official backing of the campaign. In fact, it says, quote, no official letter, no message from Trump. Later communications indicate that Clovis determined that he, Clovis, could not travel. On August 15, 2016, Papadopoulos emailed Clovis that he had received requests from multiple foreign governments, even Russia, in quotes, for, quote, closed-door workshop consultations abroad, end quote, and asked whether there was still interest for Clovis, Fairs, and Papadopoulos to, quote, go on that trip. Clovis copied Fairs in his response, which said he would not travel before the election, but that he would encourage Papadopoulos and Walid to make the trips if it was feasible. Page 93. Papadopoulos was dismissed from the Trump campaign in early October 2016 after an interview he gave to the Russian news agency Interfax generated adverse publicity. Subtitle F, Trump campaign knowledge of, quote, dirt. Papadopoulos admitted telling at least one individual outside of the campaign, specifically the then Greek foreign minister, about Russia's obtaining Clinton-related emails. In addition, a different foreign government informed the FBI that 10 days after meeting with Mifsud in late April 2016, Papadopoulos suggested that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the Trump campaign through the anonymous release of information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton. And then there's a parenthesis. This conversation occurred after the GRU spearfished Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta and stole his emails, and the GRU hacked into the DCCC and DNC. End of parenthesis. Such disclosures raised questions about whether Papadopoulos informed any Trump campaign official about the emails. When interviewed, Papadopoulos and the campaign officials who interacted with him told the prosecutor's office, the special prosecutor's office, that they could not recall Papadopoulos' sharing the information that Russia had obtained dirt on candidate Clinton in the form of emails, or that Russia could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information about Clinton. Papadopoulos stated that he could not clearly recall having told anyone on the campaign, and wavered about whether he accurately remembered an incident in which Clovis had been upset after hearing Papadopoulos tell Clovis that Papadopoulos thought, quote, they have her emails. The campaign officials who interacted or corresponded with Papadopoulos have similarly stated with varying degrees of certainty that he did not tell them. Senior policy advisor Stephen Miller, for example, did not remember hearing anything from Papadopoulos or Clovis about Russia having emails of or dirt on candidate Clinton.
Clovis stated that he did not recall anyone, including Papadopoulos, having given him non-public information that a foreign government might be in possession of material damaging to Hillary Clinton. And then the rest of page 93 has been redacted by Bill Barr. Page 94. The top part of page 94 is redacted by Bill Barr. Then it continues after the redaction. No documentary evidence and nothing in the email accounts or other communication facilities reviewed by the office, by Mueller's office, shows that Papadopoulos shared this information with the campaign. G, additional George Papadopoulos contact, and that would be presumably contact with Russians. The office investigated another Russia-related contact with Papadopoulos. The office was not fully able to explore the contact because the individual at issue, Sergei Milian, remained out of the country since the inception of our investigation and declined to meet with members of the office despite our repeated efforts to obtain an interview. Papadopoulos first connected with Milian via LinkedIn on July 15, 2016, shortly after Papadopoulos had attended the TAG summit with Clovis. Milian, an American citizen who is a native of Belarus, introduced himself, quote, as the president of the New York-based Russian-American Chamber of Commerce, end quote, and claimed that through that position he had, quote, insider knowledge and direct access to the top hierarchy in Russian politics, close quote. Papadopoulos asked Timofeev whether he had heard of Milian, although Timofeev said no. Papadopoulos met Milian in New York City. The meetings took place on July 30 and August 1st, 2016. Afterwards, Milian invited Papadopoulos to attend and potentially speak at 2 international energy conferences, including one that was to be held in Moscow in September of 2016. Papadopoulos ultimately did not attend either conference. On July, and well, we'll continue. It's the Mueller Report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're broadcasting live today from Bellevue College's campus and television studios and 91.3 FM KBCS, Bellevue, Washington, near Seattle. And thanks so much to KBCS for the studio. Of course, the station carries our show, carries all 3 hours of our show. And it's a great community station, community-supported station, nonprofit station. We had a great gig last night in Seattle at Town Hall. It was a hoot. 700 plus people. Tomorrow night, Tuesday, I'll be at Berkeley in the First Church, and Friday we'll be in Darien in Chicago at Frugal Muse Bookstore, and then Saturday in Minneapolis at Next Chapter Bookstore. So a lot lined up for the show today. First of all, it can't happen here. Well, it just did. We're going to be talking about that in just a minute. What will save America? Is it going to be impeachment? Is it going to be the 2020 election? Is it going to be, I don't know, a flaming pillar of fire, an act of God? And also, will the Republican Party even exist 10 years from now? This is an interesting conversation. In our second hour, Jamal Abdi, the head of the NIAC, the national, what is it, the Iranian, anyhow, it's an Iranian, National Iranian American Council, is going to be with us. And also, Bernie Sanders has a new student debt proposal. We'll be talking about that in the second hour. In our third hour, we're going to get into why can't the mainstream media tell the truth about the so-called center, the political center in America. Robert Reich has a great op-ed. I've been ranting about this forever, that we should be calling ourselves FDR Democrats. We'll be getting to that. And if you don't have an independent Fed, then your economy is at the mercy of a dictator. And I'll be taking your calls throughout the day. We've got, our Lord willing and the creek don't rise. Our call screen stuff is working. I'm here with a studio audience, a peanut gallery. Hey, an official peanut. Hey, there you go, an official peanut gallery. I mean that in the best sense. I hope you. Some of you aren't old enough to know what the peanut gallery was, but anyhow. So, we will be taking your calls throughout the program. 202-808-9925. So to start out, being politically incorrect, right? When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, these are concentration camps. These god-awful places that Trump and Pence and Stephen Miller and well, in the beginning, it was also General Kelly and Kirsten Nielsen, the DHS secretary. They came right out and said it. I mean, they came literally right out and said, we're going to separate these families and we're going to create conditions for them that are so unpleasant, I think was the word Kelly used, that word will get back to families in Central and South America. Don't go there because you don't want to end up in one of these jails, basically. I mean, this was an intentional strategy on the part of the Trump administration, an absolutely intentional strategy. And so now, AOC comes out and says they're concentration camps. The Republicans and the corporate media just freak out. Oh my God, how'd she say that? How could you, they're not a concentration. I went around and around about this on Friday night on Bill Maher's show. It's, the main argument against calling them concentration camps that's been laid out up to this point, and, your calls on this, can it happen here? What's the next step? How far might Trump take this? Right? I mean, are the next people to be interred going to be political prisoners? I don't know. And what's going to save America? I mean, is it going to take impeachment to stop this? Is the 2020 election going to stop this? What do you think? But in any case, the argument, the whole logical thread against calling these concentration camps, and instead calling them detention centers or internment camps or something like that, is that there were concentration camps in Germany, and we don't want to diminish the Holocaust, and so you can't call them concentration camps. Well, actually in Germany, there were two different kinds of camps. Well, in Germany, there weren't. When Hitler decided to build the death camps, I think it was about halfway through World War II that they actually started putting this into place. Maybe it was a little before that. I apologize if I don't have the timeline absolutely right. But when Hitler decided to build the death camps, the order was to build every single one of them outside of Germany. So if they were ever discovered, they could blame Auschwitz on the Poles and Belsen on the Dutch. I think it was in Holland, and like this. All of the actual death camps were not called concentration camps. They were called death camps, and their only purpose was to kill people, and they were built outside of Germany. The camps inside Germany, and there was something like 500 of them. I mean, they were all over there. Most of them were fairly small, but there were some very large ones like Dachau. There were many. In any case, I don't quote my 500. It might have only been 100 or something, but whatever. There was a bunch of them. I mean, I lived in Germany for a year. I lived down the road from a small one, and we lived, a half hour from Dachau. We visited it. And yeah, people died there. And in fact, at Dachau, they actually had a crematorium, but people were dying there. And there was a couple of instances of, particularly later in the war when prisoners of war were being brought in, where they just slaughtered them with machine guns. But they didn't have the Zyklon gas showers, right? These were not, like giant meat factories just processing human beings to kill them. They were mostly labor camps. Arbeit macht frei. Well, that's Auschwitz. Work makes you free. But that was the slogan of these concentration camps. And so good Germans, and again, you want the documentation on this, read William Scher's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and Milton Mayer's They Thought They Were Free. I mean, they just, they lay this out. And good Germans thought, oh, wow, we've got these, creepy, undesirable people here in our country. And, Hitler referred to them as rats and lice and things like that. Vermin, essentially, the same kind of language that Trump is using to describe people from south of America. Or from south of the United States. So the argument is you don't want to violate Godwin's law, right? Mike Godwin came up with this law that any argument, about politics is eventually going to end up talking about Hitler. And the first person to mention Hitler loses. Well, somebody asked Mike Godwin, who's still around, what do you think about these concentration camps? And is calling them a concentration camp a violation of Godwin's law? And he said, and I quote, I think they're concentration camps. Keep in mind that one of their functions by design is to punish these individuals and families who are detained. So even the charged term is appropriate. I mean, here, this is from this report that just came out. A 2-year-old boy locked in detention wants to be held all the time. A few girls ages 10 and 15 say they've been doing their best to feed and soothe the clingy toddler who was handed to them by a guard days ago. 3 girls told attorneys they were trying to take care of the 2-year-old boy who had wet his pants and had no diaper and was wearing a mucus-smeared shirt when the legal team encountered him. A 14-year-old girl from Guatemala said she'd been holding 2 little girls in her lap, and she said, I need comfort too. I'm bigger than they are, but I'm a child too. I mean, this is beyond grotesque. And this is happening right here in America. I mean, it's mind-boggling how essentially evil this is. I lack another word. And I think that we have to call these concentration camps, and we have to call out this administration for this brutal policy that they're pursuing. It is simply so wrong. Michael Scott Moore is an author who was kidnapped by Somali pirates. Well, he wasn't an author back then, but he wrote a book about his experience being kidnapped by Somali pirates for 2 years, right, in Somalia. He was liberated by Navy SEALs in 2014. And he says that the Somali pirates gave me toothpaste and soap, while the Trump administration just successfully last week argued in court that there is no constitutional need to give these refugees toothpaste, these children, toothpaste, soap, or beds. Even. They're sleeping on concrete floors with tinfoil. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls. We're broadcasting live from KBCS here in Bellevue College campus in Bellevue, Washington. And welcome back. Let's see here. I see I've got a couple of callers. I'm going to put you on not knowing who you are. I'm sorry, because my software is hiccuping. But you want to tell me your name and where you're calling from?
Am I on?
You are on the air, yeah.
Oh, this is Paula from Seattle, and welcome to our area, Tom. This morning on Democracy Today, they interviewed some Japanese American kids. I mean, they're not kids anymore, but they were children that were held at Fort Sill during the war. And those people, if anybody has a right to call these concentration camps, it's those people, and they are. And they were protesting down there on Saturday, and they were protesting with American Indians who had their ancestors had been held at Fort Sill. And if those people, they have the right to call them concentration camps. And on Donnie Deutsch on Saturday night, he braked AOC over the coals for calling them concentration camps.
I mean, I didn't see it, but I heard that. And in fact, Louise was telling me on the phone about this yesterday, and she said, because we'd been talking about, we need to catch Donnie Deutsch's new show, we haven't seen it yet. And she said, screw Donnie Deutsch, I'm not going to catch it.
Exactly,
if he's saying that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is like nuts for calling these concentration camps,
But here are these people that were held in the Japanese Americans that were held in those camps. If they have the energy and the passion to travel to Fort Sill to protest, then the media should be there pointing this out to the country. Where is the media?
I agree. I completely agree, and I'm totally with you. Paula, thank you very much for the call. Robert in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, sir. Yes, sir. I agree with your previous call as well in your analysis. I mean, in 1978, I was a visiting lecturer at UW La Crosse, and I was teaching a class of about 90 students. Most of them were white students, and we were talking about the concentration camps. And I could see some of the students, shaking their heads in denial. But sitting up at the top was a young student of Japanese descent. And she said, no, what the professor's saying is true, because my parents were in those camps. And so what she did, she said, Professor Harvey, what I will do is I will go home this evening And on Wednesday, when the class resumes, I will bring the books, yearbooks and pamphlets and things that my parents had when they were in those camps. She brought those back, and I let her, for at least 2 class sessions, talk about those concentration camps. And there were 10 of them. They were designed for Americans of Japanese descent. Initially, they wanted to go after the Issei, which were the first generation, which were born in Japan. Right. But they also had to get their children, which were the Nisei. And she talked about that. But what was more amazing is that she talked also about she had an uncle that served with the 442nd Nisei Regiment. So they actually took some of the young men of military age and put them with the 100th Infantry Battalion initially that was trained up there near Fort McCoy in Sparta, Wisconsin. They trained up there, and then they went over and they became the parent battalion for the 442nd Nisei Regiment. So having that first-hand experience, and the lady talks about Fort Steele. I trained at Fort Steele as a drill sergeant a few years back. And some of the evidence of those camps was still there.
It's still there, yeah. Robert, thank you for the call, and thanks for your testimony. It's great talking to you. We'll be right back. Okay. Prepare for mass arrests. This from the DuncanBanner.com via Democratic Underground. A demonstration protesting, quote, unjust incarceration of immigrants ended without incident or arrest following military police's insistence the event be moved off base property. Approximately 25 people, World War II Japanese-American internment camp survivors and their descendants plan to hold a news conference outside the Army base near Lawson, Oklahoma. That's Fort Sill. The group, called Tsuru, T-S-U-R-U, Tsuru, I hope I'm saying that right, for Solidarity, were protesting a plan to temporarily house up to 5,000 unaccompanied children through September 30th. And then this is a quote from Dr. Satsuki Ina, who held a sign with a photo of her as a child in a World War II internment camp here in the United States. She said, and I quote, 75 years ago, 120,000 of us were removed from our homes and forcibly incarcerated in prison camps across the country. We are here today to protest the repetition of history. She added, American concentration camps. These are American concentration camps. We were held without due process of law. We were charged without any evidence of being a threat to national security. And we were an, quote, unassimilable race. And they said that we were a threat to the economy. And by the way, these were also the things that not just Hitler, but pretty much right-wing fascists all over the country, all over the world have been saying. She said these exact words are being repeated today regarding innocent people seeking asylum in this country. Again, quoting, until 1942, when Americans turned their backs on us while we were disappearing from our homes, our schools, our farms, and our jobs, we're here today to speak out, to protest the unjust incarceration of innocent people seeking refuge in this country. We stand with them and we say, stop repeating history. And I would point to the word refuge. These are not immigrants. These are refugees. These are people fleeing from disasters in Central America, twin disasters, the climate change disaster that's ruining the crops. They're having massive crop failures in Central America right now as a result of basically desertification, of drought. And at the same time, Reagan went in and just screwed up all 3 of these countries with this whole, oh my God, they've elected a government that's going to give health care and education to everybody. We can't have that. And, this is just bizarre. I mean, it goes beyond bizarre. Another thing that I wanted to bring up and also get your thoughts on, and then, we'll continue taking your calls. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California this morning, or it wasn't this morning, I guess it was on Jim Vandehey's show on Axios on HBO, said that in his opinion, the Republican Party is now toast. His actual words are, they are finished. He said, white men were sold a complete bill of BS. It's just a yard of crap, and it's just damn sad. He says Trump uses racism to whip up his mostly white base. Quote, he has blatantly expressed racist points of views and expressed them on multitudes of occasions during the campaign and such. And Newsom, by the way, runs America's largest state and one in which non-whites are the majority right now. California has sued the Trump administration a record 50 times, making arguably Gavin Newsom the de facto leader of the Democratic resistance. And so the question, I mean, he's arguing 10 to 15 years from now there won't be a Republican Party. I don't know if the Republican Party can recover. I really don't. And if not, then what happens? I mean, the Libertarian Party is even more extreme than the Republicans. Young people think it's so cool. Oh, yeah, hey, let's, free drugs and free prostitution. Not free, but, legal prostitution, legal drugs. I've always said that libertarians are just Republicans who want to smoke dope and get laid. It's really just that simple. I just don't know what can replace the Republican Party. I mean, we've only seen this happen really, I think, twice in our history. The first was, very, very early on. This was during the administration of John Adams, when the Anti-Federalists essentially reincorporated under the leadership largely of Thomas Jefferson, who was Adams's vice president. This was in the 4 years leading up to 1800. This was 1797 to 1801, the Adams presidency, and Jefferson renamed the party the Democratic Republican Party, and then in the 1820s, 1830s, they kind of gradually, over a period of about a decade, stopped using the word Republican and just called it the Democratic Party. It's the longest-lasting, oldest political party in the world, the Democratic Party, founded by Thomas Jefferson. And it's gone through a lot of changes. After the Civil War, the Democratic Party was the party of Jim Crow and segregation, basically. And the Republican Party, for a while there, for about 10 years, during and after the Civil War, was the party of abolition. Well, then the Republican Party got in the act with the Democratic Party, and they were both, supporting, everything from redlining to absolute segregation schools and everything else. And then, in the 60s, Jack Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson flipped the Democratic Party on its head. And as LBJ told Bill Moyers when he signed the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, he said, I may be handing the South to the Republican Party for a generation. Well, it turns out it's been, 3 generations since then? A generation is, 19 to 20 years. So, and then the second time that we've rebooted a political party in the United States was the Whigs. The Anti-Federalists became the Democratic Republicans, and the Federalists, John Adams was a Federalist, right? And then the Federalists just lost election after election after, Jefferson was a Democrat, Madison was a Democrat, Monroe was a Democrat. It just continued, and so the Federalists just died out, and they were replaced by the Whigs, and then the Whigs died out in the 1850s. 1856, was the birth of the modern Republican Party in Jackson, Michigan, and also in Wisconsin there was something going on, and their first actually it was their second, but their first major candidate for president was Abraham Lincoln. But boy, has the Republican Party gone a long way from Lincoln. So if the Republican Party dies, what replaces it? I don't know. I really don't. And if it's the Libertarians, then frankly, in my opinion, we're actually moving toward more fascism. Because, fascism is the definition. The definition of fascism is a merger of corporate and state interests combined with belligerent nationalism. The Libertarians aren't big on the belligerent nationalism part, but the merger of corporate and state interests, that defines the Libertarians. So what might replace the Republican Party if it goes down? Or can it reinvent itself?
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after this.
It's the Mueller report. This is page 91. Although Clovis claimed to have no recollection of attending the TAG summit, Papadopoulos remembered discussing Russia and a foreign policy trip with Clovis and Fairs during the event. Papadopoulos' recollection is consistent with emails sent before and after the TAG summit. The pre-summit messages included a July 11, 2016 email in which Fairs suggested Papadopoulos, the day after the summit, to chat. and a July 12th message in the same chain in which Fares advised Papadopoulos that other summit attendees, quote, are very nervous about Russia, so be aware, end quote. 10 days after the summit, Papadopoulos sent an email to Mifsud listing Fares and Clovis as other participants in a potential meeting at the London Academy of Diplomacy. Finally, Papadopoulos' recollection is also consistent with handwritten notes from a journal that he kept at that time. Now we're going to page 92. Those notes, which are reprinted in part below, appear to refer to potential 2016 meetings in London with the representatives of the office of Putin and suggest that Fares, Clovis, and Papadopoulos would attend without the official backing of the campaign. In fact, it says, quote, no official letter, no message from Trump. Later communications indicate that Clovis determined that he, Clovis, could not travel. On August 15, 2016, Papadopoulos emailed Clovis that he had received requests from multiple foreign governments, even Russia, in quotes, for, quote, closed-door workshop consultations abroad, end quote, and asked whether there was still interest for Clovis, Fares, and Papadopoulos to, quote, go on that trip. Clovis copied Fares in his response, which said he would not travel before the election, but that he would encourage Papadopoulos and Walid to make the trips if it was feasible. Page 93. Papadopoulos was dismissed from the Trump campaign in early October 2016 after an interview he gave to the Russian news agency Interfax generated adverse publicity. Subtitle F, Trump campaign knowledge of, quote, dirt. Papadopoulos admitted telling at least one individual outside of the campaign, specifically the then Greek foreign minister, about Russia's obtaining Clinton-related emails. In addition, a different foreign government informed the FBI that 10 days after meeting with Mifsud in late April 2016, Papadopoulos suggested that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the Trump campaign through the anonymous release of information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton. And then there's a parenthesis. This conversation occurred after the GRU spearphished Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta and stole his emails, and the GRU hacked into the DCCC and DNC. End of parenthesis. Such disclosures raised questions about whether Papadopoulos informed any Trump campaign official about the emails. When interviewed, Papadopoulos and the campaign officials who interacted with him told the prosecutor's office, the special prosecutor's office, that they could not recall Papadopoulos' sharing the information that Russia had obtained dirt on candidate Clinton in the form of emails, or that Russia could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information about Clinton. Papadopoulos stated that he could not clearly recall having told anyone on the campaign, and wavered about whether he accurately remembered an incident in which Clovis had been upset after hearing Papadopoulos tell Clovis that Papadopoulos thought, quote, they have her emails. The campaign officials who interacted or corresponded with Papadopoulos have similarly stated with varying degrees of certainty that he did not tell them. Senior policy advisor Stephen Miller, for example, did not remember hearing anything from Papadopoulos or Clovis about Russia having emails of or dirt on candidate Clinton. Clovis stated that he did not recall anyone, including Papadopoulos, having given him non-public information that a foreign government might be in possession of material damaging to Hillary Clinton. And then the rest of page 93 has been redacted by Bill Barr. Page 94. The top part of page 94 is redacted by Bill Barr. Then it continues after the redaction. No documentary evidence and nothing in the email accounts or other communication facilities reviewed by the office, by Mueller's office, shows that Papadopoulos shared this information with the campaign. G, additional George Papadopoulos contact, and that would be presumably contact with Russians. The office investigated another Russia-related contact with Papadopoulos. The office was not fully able to explore the contact because the individual at issue, Sergei Milian, remained out of the country since the inception of our investigation and declined to meet with members of the office despite our repeated efforts to obtain an interview. Papadopoulos first connected with Milian via LinkedIn on July 15, 2016, shortly after Papadopoulos had attended the TAG summit with Clovis. Milian, an American citizen who is a native of Belarus, introduced himself, quote, as the president of the New York-based Russian-American Chamber of Commerce, end quote, and claimed that through that position he had, quote, insider knowledge and direct access to the top hierarchy in Russian politics, close quote. Papadopoulos asked Timofeev whether he had heard of Milian, although Timofeev said no. Papadopoulos met Millian in New York City. The meetings took place on July 30 and August 1st, 2016. Afterwards, Millian invited Papadopoulos to attend and potentially speak at 2 international energy conferences, including one that was to be held in Moscow in September of 2016. Papadopoulos ultimately did not attend either conference. On July, and well, we'll continue. It's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I may be coming to your city soon on our book tour for The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. I'll be in New York, Washington, D.C., Portland, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, and Minneapolis. Here I come. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. And to that, I will be in Berkeley, California, day after tomorrow. No, tomorrow. Right? No, wait. Today is Monday. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Yeah, tomorrow night. I'll be in Berkeley. And Friday night, I'll be in Chicago at the Frugal Muse in Darien. In Berkeley, it's at the First Church. And Saturday in Minneapolis at Next Chapter Booksellers, formerly Common Good Books in St. Paul, actually. So that's up with that. And let's pick up your phone calls here. Marta in Big Bear Lake. Whoops. Marta, I'm so sorry. I hit the button the wrong way and it dumped your call. So call right back, please, Marta. Paul in Oakland, California. Paul, you're on the air.
Hi, Tom. Hey, Richard Wolf's going to be in Berkeley right after you on Wednesday night, so I'm looking forward to that, too.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah. So you talk about sometimes this theory in history, or it's a word where the last living survivor or person who has a living memory of an event, humanity usually ends up repeating that event. And I think we're approaching...
After that last person dies, yeah.
Yeah,
or the general memory of it, yeah.
Yeah, the general memory of it's lost in the collective consciousness, yeah.
That's the 80-year cycle that we've talked about that Strauss and Howe wrote about in their book, The Fourth Turning. Yes, Paul.
Oh, okay, The Fourth Turning. So, yeah, I think we're running out of survivors for World War II, the Holocaust, the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the world's getting really dangerous about these things again. So I'm afraid if we don't continue to educate ourselves and each other, things are really going to get ugly.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Paul. And thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. And let me just go off on a quick rant about that, just to inform people who may not know what Paul and I are talking about. Neil Howe, and I forget Strauss's first name. He's now passed away. Neil Howe has been on this program a couple of times. Wrote this book back in the late 90s. Called the Fourth Turning. And the theory of the book was that basically every 80 years, every 4 generations, a generation is 20 years, every 4 generations, our country, and not just our country, they also document this in Europe and other countries as well, basically every 80 years we go through a brand new rebooting cycle and essentially repeat history, only in a different way. And the reason why is because they argue that there are 4 generations that come about as a consequence of the circumstances of history. It goes a little beyond just what Paul was mentioning, that, the old, I'm forgetting who said it, but, one of the philosophers said, when the last man who remembers, it was Arnold Toynbee, when the last man who remembers the horrors of the last great war dies, the next great war becomes inevitable. That was Toynbee's quote. And that is within that 80-year window. But Strauss and Howe said, if you look at, just to start with the generation that experiences a depression and a war, for example, World War II, the Great Depression, World War II, that generation that experiences depression and war gives birth to a generation that are the quiet builders. This was my dad's generation. They rebuild the country from the devastation of the Depression and the war. That generation gives birth to a generation that says, our parents worked their butts off, and what did they get for it? Nothing. Why do that? I mean, I want spiritual enlightenment. I want to have I want to learn more about the life and about the world. And so that generation gives birth to a seeking generation, the Ralph Waldo Emerson generation, my generation, the hippies, the spiritual seekers. And then that generation gives birth to a generation that says,
You know, our grandparents worked their butts off. Our parents sat around and stared at their navels and took acid. And neither one of them really, did all that great. And by the way, it's getting harder and harder to make a living. So I'm just going to get rich. Screw it. And so that fourth generation is the generation that is largely focused on money and largely driven by what you might call greed, but they don't think of it that way. And their excesses lead to another crash, which leads to another war, which starts the cycle all over again. And that happens every 80 years. And if you go back 80 years from right now, you had the Great Depression and World War II. 80 years before that was the Great Crash of 1856 and the Civil War. 80 years before that was the Great Depression of 1770, followed by the American Revolution. 80 years before that, there was another one. And 80 years before that, there was another one, literally on North America and in Europe, all the way back to the War of the Roses. So that's what he was talking about, just in the event you don't know. Marta in Big Bear Lake. Hey, Marta, what's up?
Yes, I think people are, for the most part, see themselves as compassionate, and I just wonder, what do you think is the solution? What is Nancy Pelosi promoting? Because I heard on, I think it was CNN, saying that the Congress is going into recess without having passed anything, and there's the fear that they're being seen as not accomplishing anything. People want a solution. They see. A lot of people see Trump at least doing something. So obviously he's doing something horrible. But even Democrats that I've talked to in California for years and years, they're just tired of people being illegal. And of course, a lot of us would say the system is broken. But how do we fix this problem? This crisis?
That's a great question, Marta, and thank you so much for the call. There's really two pieces to this. One part of it is that we need comprehensive immigration reform. And a couple of years ago, the Senate actually passed a bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill, and that was when the Republicans held the House, and Paul Ryan refused to allow a vote on it. And they couldn't, they were trying to get enough votes for a discharge petition and all that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not sure if the House has passed that same comprehensive immigration reform or not, but now Mitch McConnell in the Senate is saying, no way, we're not going to do this, we're not going to talk about it. So there's that. I mean, that's the legislative solution. But frankly, I think this needs something much larger, much more than a legislative solution. This needs massive public opinion. If we're going to get, frankly, what we need is a law that can stop Trump. So I guess I'm back to a legislative solution. We need an absolute law that says you can't do this. Now, there actually is a law that says children can only be held for 72 hours. They can only be, quote, detained for 72 hours, and then they have to be handed off to Child and Family Services and placed in foster care, or find, their parents, or find an appropriate home for them, or whatever it may be. But, the Trump administration is ignoring that law, and Bill Barr, running the Justice Department, is not going to prosecute himself or prosecute Donald Trump. It just ain't going to happen. So, this then presents a substantial challenge. And I think the only thing that's going to overcome this is public opinion. If public opinion swings hard against Trump and Pence. I mean, Mike Pence on TV this weekend, asked about this. Children can't even get soap. They can't get toothpaste. I mean, the Somali pirates gave soap and toothpaste to their captives. They don't have beds to sleep. They're sleeping on concrete, and they're covered with tinfoil, right? Or Mylar, or whatever it is. I mean, they don't even have blankets. They don't have pillows. They've got nothing, right? Children. And Pence laughs. And then he says, oh, this is all the Democrats' fault. They won't appropriate enough money. And what he's talking about is we're paying $750 per day per child to these private prisons for holding these kids in dog kennels, which is nuts. And the administration has come to the Democrats, has come to Nancy Pelosi and said, we need more money for more private prisons. And she said, no, we're not doing that. And so this was Pence's argument. It's all the Democrats' fault. We can't afford soap for these children. Give me a break. This is just absolute BS. Elizabeth in West Hollywood, California. Hey, Elizabeth, what's up?
Hi. Remember when Bushy Boy was president, and he before he was president, he was in the Air Force Reserve, but he abandoned his position, and because he was a president's son, he got away with it. And then
he went AWOL for a year.
Yeah. He never got prosecuted for that, which he should have. And then he started the war in Iraq, and I felt way back then anybody that's in charge like him who starts a war should have his children be the first on the beach. And I thought his daughters, not some cushy job in an office someplace, but I thought they should be in a service on the beach with the children. So following that, follow it with the regular soldiers. So following that reasoning, I think Trump's son, Barron, and his grandchildren, Ivanka's children, should all be in one of those camps, and they can prove how wonderful they are. And I think it's just unconscionable what they're doing to those children. It's just disgusting.
Yeah. Elizabeth, I share your sentiment. I don't know how to turn that into legislation, but I absolutely share your sentiment. Jason in East Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Jason, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to talk about AOC and the concentration camps thing. I think that she's completely right. Her language is technically correct. I think that to say never again, you don't have to have people in ovens to say that. You can be in the process of leading to extreme action, maybe not that extreme. I think that to focus on her language, though, is to miss the point. And the reason why they do that is because they don't have a lot to criticize her about. She is a very, very popular politician. I think that they fear her. I think that Donnie Deutsch, he went on MSNBC on Morning Joe, and he said that he would vote for Donald Trump over Bernie Sanders. So it just tells you the kind of person that he is. He has no principles, and he's voting with his pocketbook.
I'm with you. Jason, thank you so much for the call. I'm totally with you. And, that's not even centrist. That's milquetoast. That's BS. That's weak-kneed. That's pathetic. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment, and the news of the day, as it were. I guess the news of the day: Trump crazy. And welcome back, Colleen in Manorville, New York. Hey, Colleen, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. You're bringing up all this stuff about the concentration camp lingo and all of that, difference of opinion about language. My friend Margaret, who was the daughter of two Japanese-born parents, was born in Pasadena, California. And when she was 16, she was put into a camp in Arizona. And aside from the fact that she said it was a nice word that they used, camp, we had guards with rifles, we had barbed wire, you couldn't leave unless you had permission. They still treated these people better than what's going on at the border. But she said that even after they were allowed out of the camps, if concentration camps, because that's what she called them. And she said,
so does George Takei.
They took everything of ours. They took all our possessions. Whatever you could carry was all you were allowed to have. And her father sued the government. He got like $1,200 for everything that they had lost. But she said even after they were gone, there was martial law. And they took all these people and they broke them up into small communities all throughout the United States. And she actually had to go to work for the Wrigley family, Wrigley Chewing Gum, as maid, because everybody loved having a Japanese maid. And her father was not permitted to work because of his gender and so forth, that he had to be home by a certain time, and he couldn't get a job, and he was a landscaper. So they were in Chicago. Who's going to, hire a landscaper in Chicago? So she wound up supporting her family for a number of years as a maid. And it was really horrible on the family. The recompense that came from the government after a while was only for the people who were still living. So her father was dead. Her brother-in-law was dead. Certain people had passed away. So all of the people that had passed had no claim. So only the people who were still surviving got that money. And I don't think a lot of people understand how inequitable it was, because the families were never really compensated. And the only reason they were put in these camps is because they looked different. And it's just I'm almost glad that she's passed away. I miss her terribly, but for her to see this happening again would just break her heart, because she was a sweet lady, and she just wouldn't be able to understand this. This country
it might break her heart,
again.
or it might trigger PTSD. I mean, I have to imagine that any of the older survivors of internment camps, and for that matter, American soldiers who've been held as prisoners of war are looking at what's going on and just experiencing it at a very, very visceral level. Colleen, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Olivia, listening to KBCS in New York City. Wow. Hey, Olivia, what's up? Oh,
yes.
Hey, Olivia, let me put you on hold. I'm sorry, I just got a 20-second cue here. I misread my own clock, and I don't want to only give you 20 seconds to talk. So let me just speak to the previous caller. We need to amplify this phrase, concentration camps. We need to have this on everybody's lips. This needs to go far and wide. We need to be talking about it as much as we can, to as many people as we can. A newspaper in Salt Lake City, Utah, a couple of days ago, one of the major newspapers in Utah ran an op-ed, the voice of the editorial voice, right, the voice of the publisher, saying, yes, they're concentration camps. We need more and more of that, and anything you can do to help that happen. Write letters to your local newspaper is good. We'll be right back.
Norway is a democratic socialist country. The United States is an unfettered capitalism country. Capitalism.
Is this a live reach?
Norway has, until last year, was 37%. It's actually
Oh, okay. We're back. My apologies for that. Sometimes you're on the road. Weird stuff happens technically. Richard in Bellflower, California. Hey, Richard. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. You know what I wondered when the Japanese Americans were in those concentration camps, what happened to their homes, their property, their businesses, and even their money? They must have had money in banks.
Yeah, it was all stolen. It was all taken. And the earlier caller talked about a family that she knew. She was friends with a woman who was interned in one of these camps. And when they got out, they had lost everything. When they got out, they sued and they got $1,200. A few years ago, the survivors of the Japanese concentration camps, the U.S. concentration camps for people of Japanese ancestry, received, I believe, $20,000 each for each one of the survivors, which in many cases was just a meaningless amount of money. I mean, it was a good gesture. And it should set the stage for a larger conversation about reparations, because what we did to people of African ancestry for 400 years in this, to this day in this country, is actually prior to the 1960s, you could argue, is even far worse than the concentration camps, and in some cases even today still is. But Richard, that's what happened. So thank you for the call. Olivia in there we go. Olivia in New York City. Hey, Olivia, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I want to thank you for all you do, first of all. And secondly, I watched you on Bill Maher on Friday night, hoping you could get a word in, but you weren't able to. And it's too bad, because I wanted to listen to what you had to say. But of course,
I got a few words in, Olivia. It wasn't totally terrible.
That Republican woman sitting next to you took over the whole show, I think. But anyway, the thing, I wanted to follow up on Donny Deutsch. I want to tell everybody, or to remind everybody, that Donny Deutsch is worth $200 million. And he will never vote for a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or any of those people, because he's a Wall Street lover. I mean, he's one of those guys. He lives in the city, and he's one of those guys. I just wanted to know everybody to know that about him.
Okay, noted. Thank you, Olivia. Generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of trashing people by name individually and all that sort of thing, but it is useful to know where somebody's coming from. Lisa in Marina Del Rey, California, listening on 90.7 FM. Hey, Lisa, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I love you. I'm a tried and true Democrat, but there's something that is just killing me and killing so many mothers in California right now, which is the medical fascism that's happening and the fact that Big Pharma owns our families. They're pushing through a bill right now, SB 276, that would basically take away all medical exemptions, which is just...
Yeah. Lisa, we're not having a conversation right now about vaccines, and I'm not going to go there. That's for another day. Rich in Cedro Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, when we talk about concentration camps, people get a little bit abstract. It's kind of an abstract term, but as you and I know, German is a brutally efficient language. And the Konzentrieren means to bring together, it's a gathering point to bring, your enemies of the state or your undesirable people into this one spot. Because people don't think about it that way. And, as you're comparing the concentration camps to the death camps, well, this is where they would concentrate the people before sorting them out and shipping them out to possibly the death camps. And the other
right in modern, you're right. That was the German phrase, and it did mean that, and it still does mean that in German. But in English, it doesn't. People concentration. What the hell does that mean? And thus, we've got these words detention and internment, which are English phrases that are much more specific and we understand. But you're absolutely right, Rich. The whole origin of concentration in concentration camps was bringing them together, also segregating them from the rest of society. Back to you, Rich.
Yeah, and I want to mention there's a very good German movie. It was made in 1990 called The Nasty Girl, about a modern day, it's based on a true story about a modern day woman who makes the mistake of researching the history of her small village and finds herself blocked at every attempt and exposes, she ended up having to get kicked out of her, or she left her town because was basically ostracized because she exposed, some of the leading modern-day citizens were involved in organizing the concentration camp outside of, I believe the town was Breslau, where the story originated. But if you can get a hold of a copy of The Nasty Girl from 1990, a German film.
Do you know if it's like on Netflix or Hulu or something?
I have no idea. I saw it when I was living in Germany on TV.
Sean just said it's on Prime, on Amazon Prime, on Hulu, and on Amazon. So, yeah.
There you go.
Rich, thank you. Thanks for thank you for the heads up on that. That's great. Rosemary in St. Augustine, Florida. Hey, Rosemary, what's up?
Oh, thank you, Tom, for taking my call. I just want to throw something out to you to get an opinion. A few of my lady friends and I, who are way over the 70 and 80s, get together every once in a while for coffee and discuss what's going on with the border. And as we were talking about it, one of the ladies' grandsons walked in and said, "Hey, ladies, I have a suggestion. See if you can get someone to answer this. How about the reason the Democrats don't want to have our borders secured is because they're getting kickbacks from all of the drugs that are coming in from the Mexican cartel." And that's your answer. Follow the money and you'll find out.
Yeah, you think, what a great conspiracy theory, Rosemary. Rosemary, whoever told you that is a fool. Just an absolute screaming fool. But I'm sure that story, so this is an example of the kind of stuff that travels around this weird little right-wing bubble that from Glenn Beckistan to Sean Hannity's stand. It's truly, truly bizarre that people would even believe that.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We take life back!
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
It's the Mueller Report. This is page 91. Although Clovis claimed to have no recollection of attending the TAG summit, Papadopoulos remembered discussing Russia and a foreign policy trip with Clovis and Fairs during the event. Papadopoulos' recollection is consistent with emails sent before and after the TAG summit. The pre-summit messages included a July 11, 2016 email in which Fairs suggested Papadopoulos the day after the summit to chat, and a July 12th message in the same chain in which Fairs advised Papadopoulos that other summit attendees, quote, are very nervous about Russia, so be aware, end quote. 10 days after the summit, Papadopoulos sent an email to Mifsud listing Fairs and Clovis as other participants in a potential meeting at the London Academy of Diplomacy. Finally, Papadopoulos' recollection is also consistent with handwritten notes from a journal that he kept at that time. Now we're going to page 92. Those notes, which are reprinted in part below, appear to refer to potential 2016 meetings in London with the representatives of the office of Putin and suggest that Fairs, Clovis, and Papadopoulos would attend without the official backing of the campaign. In fact, it says, quote, no official letter, no message from Trump. Later communications indicate that Clovis determined that he, Clovis, could not travel. On August 15, 2016, Papadopoulos emailed Clovis that he had received requests from multiple foreign governments, even Russia, in quotes, for, quote, closed-door workshop consultations abroad, end quote, and asked whether there was still interest for Clovis, Fairs, and Papadopoulos to, quote, go on that trip. Clovis copied Fairs in his response, which said he would not travel before the election, but that he would encourage Papadopoulos and Walid to make the trips if it was feasible. Page 93. Papadopoulos was dismissed from the Trump campaign in early October 2016 after an interview he gave to the Russian news agency Interfax generated adverse publicity. Subtitle F, Trump campaign knowledge of, quote, dirt. Papadopoulos admitted telling at least one individual outside of the campaign, specifically the then Greek foreign minister, about Russia's obtaining Clinton-related emails. In addition, a different foreign government informed the FBI that 10 days after meeting with Mifsud in late April 2016, Papadopoulos suggested that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the Trump campaign through the anonymous release of information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton. And then there's a parenthesis. This conversation occurred after the GRU spearfished Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta and stole his emails, and the GRU hacked into the DCCC and DNC. End of parenthesis. Such disclosures raised questions about whether Papadopoulos informed any Trump campaign official about the emails. When interviewed, Papadopoulos and the campaign officials who interacted with him told the prosecutor's office, the special prosecutor's office, that they could not recall Papadopoulos' sharing the information that Russia had obtained dirt on candidate Clinton in the form of emails, or that Russia could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information about Clinton. Papadopoulos stated that he could not clearly recall having told anyone on the campaign, and wavered about whether he accurately remembered an incident in which Clovis had been upset after hearing Papadopoulos tell Clovis that Papadopoulos thought, quote, they have her emails. The campaign officials who interacted or corresponded with Papadopoulos have similarly stated with varying degrees of certainty that he did not tell them. Senior policy advisor Stephen Miller, for example, did not remember hearing anything from Papadopoulos or Clovis about Russia having emails of or dirt on candidate Clinton. Clovis stated that he did not recall anyone, including Papadopoulos, having given him non-public information that a foreign government might be in possession of material damaging to Hillary Clinton. And then the rest of page 93 has been redacted by Bill Barr. Page 94. The top part of page 94 is redacted by Bill Barr. Then it continues after the redaction. No documentary evidence and nothing in the email accounts or other communication facilities reviewed by the office, by Mueller's office, shows that Papadopoulos shared this information with the campaign. G, additional George Papadopoulos contact. And that would be presumably contact with Russians. The office investigated another Russia-related contact with Papadopoulos. The office was not fully able to explore the contact because the individual at issue, Sergei Millian, remained out of the country since the inception of our investigation and declined to meet with members of the office despite our repeated efforts to obtain an interview. Papadopoulos first connected with Millian via LinkedIn on July 15, 2016, shortly after Papadopoulos had attended the TAG summit with Clovis. Millian, an American citizen who is a native of Belarus, introduced himself, quote, as the president of the New York-based Russian-American Chamber of Commerce, end quote, and claimed that through that position he had, quote, insider knowledge and direct access to the top hierarchy in Russian politics, close quote. Papadopoulos asked Timofeev whether he had heard of Millian, although Timofeev said no. Papadopoulos met Millian in New York City. The meetings took place on July 30 and August 1st, 2016. Afterwards, Millian invited Papadopoulos to attend and potentially speak at 2 international energy conferences, including one that was to be held in Moscow in September of 2016. Papadopoulos ultimately did not attend either conference. On July, and well, we'll continue. It's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Mueller report.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Jamal Abdi. He's the, by the way, we've been talking about the concentration camps and calling them concentration camps and the fate and future of the Republican Party in the face of all this, the insanity of the Trump administration in our previous hour. Now, moving forward, I want to get into the situation in Iran. And on the line with us is Jamal Abdi. He's the president of the National Iranian American Council. NIAC, NIAC.org is their website. You can tweet him at jabdi or at NIA Council. And Jamal, welcome back to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And by the way, I'm remote. We're doing our show today from the Bellevue College campus at KBCS in Bellevue, Washington. And so there's, as a result of that, there's about a second delay in our telephone. So if we step on each other or whatever, it's all good. It's these major new sanctions that Donald Trump says he has imposed or is in the process of imposing on Iran to ramp up the pressure. According to a number of economists, excuse me, well, one specifically, Caitlin Birch, a global economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit, that's the Economist magazine, told CNBC's Squawk Box Europe on Monday, quote, we can safely say that Iran's revenue from oil has been cut by at least 2/3, so they are in a very dangerous economic position. If Trump's sanctions are actually effective at knocking out the not just the surface parts of the Iranian economy, but really kick out the underpinnings of the Iranian economy and throw it into the equivalent of a 1930s style economic depression. What will the consequences of that be? And do you think that that's actually what Trump is trying to do? And is that a very real possibility?
I do think that is the strategy, if we can even call it that. So if the sanctions actually succeed in what their intended goal is, well, success supposedly is Iran capitulates and accepts these 12 demands that Pompeo has issued, which essentially equate to Iran completely changing its security posture and letting its guard down when it comes to its regional challengers and foes, doing a 180 on the entire Islamic Republic as it's known. And while I'm sure that we would love to see some of those things happen, or at least some accommodation being reached, it's not going to come through these sanctions. So if the sanctions succeed, which they are, these are very successful sanctions, if the goal is to make lives of ordinary Iranians miserable, but if the idea is, which I think it is to galvanize Iranians to come out into the streets and put pressure on the government and the regime, and that pressure will then be translated into some behavior change or some desire to capitulate on the Iranian government's part. What's really happening is the opposite, though, because there is not a organized political movement behind this, and really a lot of the organized, civil society inside of Iran has really been crippled by this. They are among the, they're the canaries in the coal mine of this maximum pressure policy, and so. Really what we're seeing is Iranian civil society being devastated, the middle class being devastated, all of the levers that could actually put upward pressure on a government or on a regime have all been dismantled by the United States sanctions. And so what you have instead is a government that is becoming or will become increasingly radicalized, and where the most hardline forces and the forces that benefit from a securitized environment and benefit from, there's a threat of war, there needs to be a state of emergency, they're the ones that end up accumulating the power, and it's at the expense of more moderate voices and civil society voices. So one of the architects of these sanctions once asked me, or it was at a panel, said, well, would you support sanctions on Nazi Germany? And the response is, well, we did put sanctions on Germany. That's part of the way that we got to the radical state that Adolf Hitler presided over. And there's no history of this approach actually working, and yet the wake-up call that should have been last week of the United States being 10 minutes away from launching military strikes that could have started World War III apparently fell on deaf ears in the Trump administration, and they're going to stay the course and just continue with these sanctions. Consequences be damned.
Well, I think you might have already answered my second question, but let me run through it anyway. You would think that Americans would have enough common sense and memory to even recent memory. Our sanctions against Cuba just caused people to become more loyal to Fidel. Our sanctions against Venezuela caused people to become more loyal to Hugo Chavez. The Great Depression here in the United States, which you could argue was not exogenous, it wasn't caused by some external force that we could point to, but there were forces that were blamed for the Great Depression, and probably rightly so, the big banks and Wall Street. It didn't cause Americans to say, oh, I guess we just need to capitulate to the big banks and Wall Street. It pulled Americans together. Tough times. People tend to pull together during tough times. And during World War II, we had, you couldn't buy butter, you couldn't buy milk, you couldn't buy meat without coupons, without rationing coupons. There were all kinds of limits. It was functionally sanctions. And did that cause people to say, screw Roosevelt? No, they gave him 4 terms. When in the history of the world have sanctions ever been successful at doing anything other than strengthening your opponents? And when, Jamal, are these idiots who are running American foreign policy going to figure this out? Even Kennedy made this mistake with Cuba.
Well, and look at Saddam and Iraq. We had sanctions, crippling sanctions there, and that didn't work in changing Saddam's behavior or in preventing the United States from getting into the most devastating war of at least the last generation. So we've seen this playbook before, and I think that the answer to your question is, yeah, they know this. They know this isn't going to work. That's exactly the point. These are people in John Bolton and Mike Pompeo who are apparently running the show. Trump, I guess, parachutes in and stops the military strikes last minute. But by and large, it seems like it's John Bolton and Mike Pompeo's world, and we're just living in it. And they believe that military action is necessary. They think that, we need to get there. And what I view is how they see this is that they see political obstacles to military action more than they see obstacles coming from Iran.
I agree. So, Jamal, forgive my interruption, but we just have about a minute and a half, and it just occurred to me, the one area where sanctions actually are effective, and you're mentioning Iraq is a great example, is if you actually intend. If your goal is to invade a country, destroy a country, bomb a country, ruin a country, then sanctions actually do work. They weaken a country to the point where you might be able to then attack them. Do you think I think these guys are thinking that way, that the goal of these sanctions in Iran is to weaken it enough that they won't have enough, money and resources to run their military?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think that even some of the folks who are coming at this from the lens of we need regime change so that we can have a democracy in Iran, which, great, I would love to have a democracy in Iran, but you can't install a democracy. You have to grow a democracy. But I think even they, in reality, people like Mark Dubowitz from Foundation for Defense of Democracies and these, Washington think tanks and lobbies that are essentially the de facto lobbies of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel, they don't want Iran to actually be a country that is ruled by its people and that actually has a say, an agency in what's happening in the region. They don't want that. And so the best way to do that is to weaken the country and then destroy it with a war. Iran is already in the midst of an economic war imposed by the United States, and it's just a matter of time until we get into the military course if something doesn't change.
Amazing stuff. Jamal Abdi. Jamal, thanks so much for dropping by today and talking with us. I really appreciate it.
Always happy to join you.
Thank you. The website, niac.org. It's the National Iranian American Council, and they're just doing great work. You should check out what they're up to. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We're broadcasting live from the Bellevue College campus, the television studios, and 91.3 FM KBCS in Bellevue, Washington, near Seattle. And welcome back. Cheryl in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Cheryl, what's on your mind today?
Well, you were talking about the Republican Party going away, and you're talking about one scenario. My scenario is a little different. I would like to see a progressive party. And
I'd like to see the Democratic Party be taken over by progressives so it becomes a progressive party.
Well, I would like to see that, but then where...
I mean, it happened in the 30s and the 40s, and arguably in the 60s.
Well, it would be nice if it would
did.
do that, but then the corporate Democrats would have to do... I don't want the other side to...
They'd have to go away, just like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, primaried, what was it, Joe Walsh or whatever his name? No, Joe... I forget his name. Joe Crowley, the congressman that she bumped out.
If the Democratic Party can push them out, fine. But and history is like, okay, you had what we're in right now is the Roaring '20s, in my opinion.
I agree.
I'm not on any. And then there's the Depression, and we're getting close to it.
Yep, I agree.
I'm hoping that we can avoid it, but. At any rate, that was an idea that when you were talking I came up with, was that if they're going to fade out, I would rather go the way of having the progressives take over the lead, whether it's within the other party and then the corporate people get together and form another party.
Yeah. I think what's going on, Cheryl, is the Republican Party went through this transition with the Reagan Revolution, where they went from being a fairly large tent party that, with multiple factions that were able to coexist and collaborate and work together. Their worldview is somewhat different than the Democrats, but not radically different. And that party got taken over by essentially the neo-fascists, the libertarians, the billionaires, particularly the petro-billionaires and the tobacco billionaires. And And that led us to where we are today with the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is going through something very similar right now, only it's being taken over by FDR Democrats, which is return to the core. Now, the Republicans return to the core also. I mean, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover ran administrations that, I mean, they're not as insane as Trump, but politically, in terms of, political goals and postures and things like that, they're pretty much identical to the modern Republican Party. So both parties seem to be going back to their 1920s, 1930s roots. And I completely agree with you. I think that, and this is my rant from the last hour about the fourth turning. I think that we are poised on the edge of the next Great Depression. I think 2007, 2008 was the beginning of one, and we just poured money into it at the level of the Fed. And now we know that since 2016, if it wasn't for government borrowing, corporate borrowing, and family borrowing, and by the way, family debt right now is at $12 trillion. Right, we're an $18 trillion a year economy. Family debt is at $12 trillion. If it wasn't for all that borrowing, there would have been no growth of the economy since 2016, none. And which means that the entire Trump economy is being held together with baling wire and bubble gum, and it's just waiting for a giant wind to hit it. So I'm with you, Cheryl. Thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. We're broadcasting live from Bellevue College's campus and television studios in 91.3 FM KBCS in Bellevue, Washington, near Seattle. Stick around. We'll be right back.
So as you probably every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, broadcasting live from KBCS in the Bellevue College campus and television studios in Bellevue near Seattle, where last night we were at Town Hall. It was a hoot. It was just a great time. And I want to add another topic to this hour. If you have any thoughts on what we can do about the situation with Iran and these crazies in the Trump administration, I'd love to hear them. But that said, Donald Trump and the Republican Party 2 years ago literally carved out $1.5 trillion in debt. And over the next decade, it may be as much as $5 trillion. Carved out $1.5 trillion in immediate debt and handed it, or 87% of it, handed it to giant corporations and billionaires and rich people. And said, here you go, have fun. And they admitted this. I mean, they just basically came right out and said, yeah, we're going to give the billionaires, $1.5 trillion, $1,500 billion, $1.5 million. We're just going to give it to them in the form of tax breaks and tax cuts. And by the way, we're going to make those tax cuts permanent for everybody who makes over $75,000 a year. And for people who make less than $75,000 a year, those tax cuts are going to expire in 8 years. So that's what they said, right? Or they expire in 10 years, but 8 years from now. Okay, they did it. It didn't crash the economy. The corporations took their $1 trillion and used it for stock buybacks, which diminishes the number of shares of stock in circulation, which increases the price of each share, without going through a whole economic explanation. But basically, all the corporations did was use that money to jack up their stock prices, which made them richer, or at least made their senior executives and their shareholders richer, and all those people happy. And, so if we can, the question then if we can give $1.5 trillion to rich people, which we did 2 years ago, and borrow it, why can't we give $1.5 trillion to everybody in the country who has student debt? Now, one of the arguments that's made largely by the Republicans is, well, if you do that, many of these people who have student debt are actually very wealthy people. They or their kids, or their kids' parents, they're wealthy people. Yeah, they took out a student loan, but, that doesn't mean that they're poor. And you're giving welfare to rich people. You don't want to do that, do you? That's a BS argument. This is a complete straw man argument. It's the exact same argument that they tried to use on Social Security, where they said, you realize Charles Koch is eligible for Social Security right now. He's over 65. Isn't there something wrong with, one of the richest men in America getting Social Security? No, there's nothing wrong with it. Right? Charles Koch's kids can go to a public school for free, too. Charles Koch can get, fire help, from the fire department for free. He can, get police services if he dials 911. That's called society. That's all of us together. We're all in this thing together. And one of the big things that we learned from the GI Bill after World War II was that if you invest, when literally, millions, I don't know the number, but it was well over 1 million young men who had come back from World War II. My dad was one of them, and my wife Louise's dad was one of them. And my dad dropped out, and 2 years into it, he wanted to be a history professor. Louise's dad was able to stick with it, and my dad dropped out because mom got pregnant with me. But Louise's dad was able to stick with it and get his law degree, and he became the assistant attorney general for the state of Michigan. Right? And what they learned was that if you give these young people free education, for every dollar you invest in that free education, I'm talking college here, for every dollar you invest in that college education, you get $7 over the course of the lifetime of that person in additional tax revenue that you never would have gotten if they hadn't gotten that college degree, because they now have a higher income than people who don't have college degrees. So it's a 700% return on investment, right? Investing in free college. So if we were to borrow $1.5 trillion over the next 30 years, we're going to get back, what, $9.5 trillion, $10 trillion? I can't do math that fast, but 7 times 1.5, whatever that is, that's what you're going to get back. So this is the intellectual infrastructure of America. We all understand, if we build roads, then, trucks can go on those roads and do commerce, and it's going to increase economic activity, which will increase tax revenue, which will pay for the roads. Sort of sounds like Reaganomics, like trickle down, right? Except trickle down is based on BS, and this is actual economics. It's investing in infrastructure rather than investing in simply giving money to rich people, which is Reagan's thing, and Bush's and Trump's. But so Bernie has proposed that we simply wipe out all student debt right now, and going forward, all public colleges and universities be free. And, I've been saying this forever. It's insane. We're literally the only developed country in the world that has the, massive student debt. People can go into debt in other countries, going to college if they want to go to, Oxford or Cambridge or, fancy college, very high-end colleges. But pretty much every other developed country in the world gets it. They invest in their young people. And so this is not a rant about how wonderful Bernie is. I mean, he's not the only one. There's, and by the way, Pramila Jayapal is proposing this legislation in the House of Representatives, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, along with Mark Pocan. So, and Ilhan Omar is also, she's joining Jayapal in putting this thing forward. So do you see any problem with this? I mean, do you think that the Republicans are right saying, you don't want to give free college to people because, then wealthy families will be able to go to college for free, even though they can send their kids to elementary school for free, right? What am I missing here? I don't think I'm missing anything, but if you can figure it out, give me a call.
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls. What's up with Iran? What's up with the Republican Party? What's up with kids in concentration camps? What's up with free education? We're broadcasting live from Bellevue, Washington, KBCS.
It's the Mueller report. We're on page 99. Denis Klimnitov, an employee of NES, the new economic school in Moscow, said that when Russians learned of Page's involvement in the Trump campaign in March 2016, the excitement was palpable. Weber recalled that in summer 2016, there was substantial interest in the Trump campaign in Moscow, and he felt that bringing a member of the campaign to the new school would be beneficial. Page was eager to accept the invitation to speak at the new school, and he sought approval from Trump campaign officials to make the trip to Russia. On May 16, 2016, while that request was still under consideration, Page emailed Clovis, J.D. Gordon, and Walid Fairs and suggested that candidate Trump take his place speaking at the commencement ceremony in Moscow. On June 19, 2016, Page followed up again to request approval to speak at the NES event and to reiterate that NES, quote, would love to have Mr. Trump speak at the annual celebration in Page's place. Campaign manager Corey Lewandowski responded the same day, saying, quote, if you want to do this, it would be outside of your role with the DJT for President campaign. I am certain Mr. Trump will not be able to attend, end quote. In early July 2016, Page traveled to Russia for the NES events. On July 5th, 2016, Denis Klimenitov, copying his brother Dmitry Klimenitov, emailed Maria Zakharova, the director of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs Information and Press Department, about Page's visit and his connection to the Trump campaign. Denis Klimenitov said in the email that he wanted to draw the Russian government's attention to Page's visit in Moscow. His message to Zakharova continued, quote, Page is Trump's advisor on foreign policy. He is a known businessman. He used to work in Russia. If you have any questions, I would be happy to help contact him, end quote. Dmitry Klimenitov then contacted Russian press secretary Dmitry Peskov about Page's visit to see if Peskov wanted to introduce Page to any Russian government officials. The following day, Peskov responded to what appears to have been the same Denis Klimenitov-Zakharova email thread. Peskov wrote, quote, I have read about Page. Specialists say he is far from being the main one, so I better not initiate a meeting in the Kremlin, end of quote. On July 7, 2016, Page delivered the first of his two speeches in Moscow at NES. In the speech, Page criticized the U.S. government's foreign policy toward Russia, stating that, quote, Washington and other Western capitals have impeded potential progress through their often hypocritical focus on ideas such as democratization, inequality, corruption, and regime change. On July 8, 2016, Page delivered a speech during the NES commencement. After Page delivered his commencement address, Russian Deputy Prime Minister and NES board member Arkady Dvorkovich spoke at the ceremony and stated that the sanctions the United States had imposed on Russia had hurt the NES. Page and Dvorkovich shook hands at the commencement ceremony, and Weber recalled that Dvorkovich made statements to Page about working together in the future. The rest of that paragraph has been redacted, deleted by Bill Barr. Page said that during his time in Moscow, he met with friends and associates he knew from when he lived in Russia, including Andrei Baranov, a former Gazprom employee who had become the head of investor relations at Rosneft, a Russian energy company. Page stated that he and Baranov talked about immaterial, non-public information. Page believed he and Baranov discussed Rosneft President Igor Sechin, and he thought Baranov might have mentioned the possibility of a sale of a stake in Rosneft in passing. We're on page 101 now. Page recalled mentioning his involvement in the Trump campaign with Baranov, although he did not remember details of the conversation. Page also met with individuals from Tatneft, a Russian energy company, to discuss possible business deals, including having Page work as a consultant. On July 8, 2016, while he was in Moscow, Page emailed several campaign officials and stated that he would send, quote, a readout soon regarding some incredible insights and outreach I've received from a few Russian legislators and senior members of the presidential administration here. On July 9, 2016, Page emailed Clovis, writing in pertinent part, quote, Russian Deputy Prime Minister and NES board member Arkady Dvorkovich also spoke before the event. In a private conversation, Dvorkovich expressed strong support for Mr. Trump and a desire to work together toward devising better solutions in response to the vast range of current international problems. Based on feedback from a diverse array of other sources in the presidential administration, it was readily apparent that this sentiment was widely held at all levels of government, end quote. Despite these representations to the campaign, and then the rest of that paragraph has been blocked off by Bill Barr. The office was unable to obtain additional evidence or testimony about who Page may have met or communicated with in Moscow. Thus, Page's activities in Russia, as described in his emails with the campaign, were never fully explained. Page 102. D. Later campaign work. This is still Carter Page. Later campaign work and removal from the campaign. In July 2016, after returning from Russia, Page traveled to the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. While there, Page met Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. That interaction is described in Volume 1. Page later emailed campaign officials with feedback he said he received from ambassadors he had met at the convention. And he wrote that Ambassador Kislyak was very worried about candidate Clinton's worldviews. And then the rest of that paragraph is redacted by Bill Barr. It's the Mueller Report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I may be coming to your city soon on our book tour for The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. I'll be in New York, Washington, D.C., Portland, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, and Minneapolis. Here I come. More information is available at thomhartmann.com.
And the Seattle part of that was last night at Town Hall. It was just great. We had about 700 people show up. Tomorrow night, I'm in San Francisco, well, actually in Berkeley, at First Church and with the Booksmith. And thanks to the Booksmith for getting some books out there. And on Friday this week, I'll be in Chicago, or actually Darien, the suburban Chicago, at the Frugal Muse bookstore. And on Saturday in Minneapolis, well, actually in St. Paul, you get all this right, at New Chapter Booksellers, formerly Common Good Books. And so anyhow, pick up your phone calls here. I just wanted to very quickly point this out. This a book, The 30 Stages of Genocide, from Genocide Watch by Gregory Stanton, reposted over at DU by Kay Pete, who just finds some of the coolest stuff. The 10 stages of genocide. Number 1, classification. People are divided into us and them. Number 2, symbolization. People are forced to identify themselves. Yes, I am a refugee. Number 3, discrimination. People begin to face systematic discrimination. Number 4, dehumanization. People equated with animals, vermin, or diseases. Remember when Steve Miller and Donald Trump were talking like this? I mean, at the beginning, right? In infestation was the phrase that they used. Number 5, organization. The government creates special groups, that is to say, specific types of police or military, to enforce the policies specifically against this group. Number 5, we've already passed all 5 of these, right? Number 6, polarization. The government broadcasts propaganda to turn the general populace against the group. Trump coming out, they're robbers, they're rapists, they're gang members, it's the worst of the worst. You know, the poor, pathetic woman who called at the end of the first hour, I think it was, saying, well, the reason the Democrats don't want a secure border, that's such nonsense. The Democrats want a secure border. Everybody wants a secure border. Come on, this is, it's just a simple lie. It's just that there's, stupid places to put the fence. And frankly, if you had policies, and that's a whole nother conversation. Actually, I'm not even going to go there. Number 6, polarization. The government broadcast propaganda. Okay, I mentioned that. Number 7, preparation. Official action to remove and relocate people begins. This is 7 out of 10 stages of genocide. And then number 8, the beginning of murders, theft of property, and trial massacres. Number 9, extermination, wholesale elimination of the group, although it's called extermination rather than murder because they're not considered human. And number 10, denial. The government denies it ever did that crime. And, here we are. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls, Stephen in Renton, Washington. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind today? Stephen?
I'm here, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, there you go.
All right.
Go for it.
So I was telling the screener that several lifelong Democrats that I've known for decades are talking about they just can't vote for Bernie. So a lot of these same people, they want the post office privatized. They appear to be morphing into Republicans, and as you've already hit the nail on the head, the Republicans have been taken over by the Libertarians. So we need the new revolution of maybe we have to think up a new name, a new party. I don't know, but it's man, what a trip. It's a paradigm shift. And
I'm with you, Stephen. I'm with you, and spot on. And thank you for listening to KBCS. Here's how I would message this. The media loves to talk about people like you and me as being the far left, right? We're not the far left, at all.
It's a circle, and we're all in
Sean,
it.
For some reason, Sean, I can't drop this. But I think my call screen software just froze up. Yeah, well, it's not good on our end. Our call screen software just croaked. But in any case, so I'm just going to talk for a little bit here. I think that we need to rebrand ourselves. I really do. That we just need to seriously rebrand ourselves and call ourselves FDR Democrats. Right, and every time somebody in the media says, "Well, the far left says this," or "the far left says that," or any of this kind of, frankly, BS, we just need to say, "No, it's not the far left. We are not the far left. That's not what's going on here." And what it is we're FDR Democrats. We want to return the Democratic Party back to its roots, back to its progressive roots, back to the worldview that FDR had, and return. I mean, FDR went so far as to say, and this was, in the year before he died, he went so far as to say that we should define a new Bill of Rights, a second Bill of Rights is what he called it, a second Bill of Rights, and that second Bill of Rights should include things like the right to health care, the right to education, the right, are you getting this, as in college as well, the right to housing, FDR proposed, the right to a job. Now, when you say something that is a right, what that means is, we have broadly decided in the United States that we all have a right, essentially a right to have the fire department put out our fire if our house is on fire. We decided a long time ago that we have the right to police protection. In fact, if the police fail to protect you or the fire department fails to service, to take care of you if there's a fire or something, you can sue, right? Your right was taken away. And Sean, fill this break, please. And so these things are rights, and FDR was talking about these as rights. And this is like, and people say, oh, these guys, Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, they're so far left. This is the extreme left. This is the weird. And screw that. We're not the far left. We are what America wants. And this whole idea of the far left, I think it's time to rebrand ourselves as the FDR Democrats and go back to that. And at the same time, the media likes to use the phrase, the hard right. And, this is particularly bizarre from my point of view because the fascist right loves the word hard, right? We're tough guys. We're the hard right. Yeah. Call us hard right. We're fine with that. I would like to call them the fascist right because that's what they are. They're friggin' fascists. And why don't we just own up to that? Why don't we just acknowledge that? Why can't, why do we have to just dance around all this stuff? It strikes me as weak and incompetent and ineffective that this just, there's got to be a way to essentially completely rebrand the whole thing and say, yes, it is possible to have a political party, a progressive political party in the United States. It is possible to have a fascist political party in the United States, and we need to acknowledge that. So, anyway, to that rant. A couple of other things here that I wanted to mention to you, by the way, just what's going on. We talked about Iran and where this might go. This is actually very concerning. And again, if anybody has any stories of any time, sanctions did anything other than weaken a country enough that it can be invaded, let me know. Mark Sumner over at Daily Kos is, he's just like one of the great writers, one of the really great progressive writers in this country. It's got a new piece out. Randomly threaten, pretend to win, and walk away and brag. This is Trump's only policy, is to have no actual policy. And by the way, this is how he runs his businesses, right? Trump is all about bluster. This is why he has lost so much money. If he had taken that $400 million that he got from his father's estate, if he had taken that $400 million and simply put it in the Dow, put it in the stock market back in the 70s when he got that money, he would be worth 10 or 20 trillion dollars today, or billion dollars, excuse me. I mean, he'd be vastly, but according to Steve Bannon, he's only worth $50 million. And I'm wondering if he's even worth that. I think, frankly, he's got a negative net worth. So this strategy that he has used to destroy business after business after business, he's now imposing on the United States. He's now doing to us. Throughout his business career, this guy was so gullible, so fundamentally stupid that people would come to him and say, "Hey, I've got a great idea, Donald. Why don't we do Trump vodka?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, cool, Trump vodka." And, a year later, they're out of business. "Oh, I got a great idea, Donald. Why don't we do a Trump airline?" "Oh, yeah, Trump airline, great idea." 3 years later, they're bankrupt. "Hey, Donald, let's do Trump, branded ties. Let's do Trump. It's crazy." This is how he ran his business. Whoever talked to him last, got his ear, got him excited. He was like, "Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that." And then it doesn't work out because he doesn't know how to run a business. And obviously, he doesn't know how to run a government. I mean, he doesn't even have a full cabinet. For God's sake, he doesn't have a Secretary of Defense. And this is the man in whose hands we have put our country. Well, not we. Apparently Russia had something to do with it, and maybe a few other countries as well. It looks like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, a few other countries were messing in our elections. This is where we're at, and it's an absolute screaming disaster. And it's time for us all to wake up and realize what a fraud this man is. And please tell your friends. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
When you're on the road, there's always a glitch. We'll get this glitch fixed during this break, and we'll be back.
It's the Mueller report. This is page 91. Although Clovis claimed to have no recollection of attending the TAG summit, Papadopoulos remembered discussing Russia and a foreign policy trip with Clovis and Fairs during the event. Papadopoulos' recollection is consistent with emails sent before and after the TAG summit. The pre-summit messages included a July 11, 2016 email in which Fairs suggested Papadopoulos the day after the summit to chat, and a July 12th message in the same chain in which Fairs advised Papadopoulos that other summit attendees, quote, "are very nervous about Russia, so be aware," end quote. 10 days after the summit, Papadopoulos sent an email to Mifsud listing Fairs and Clovis as other participants in a potential meeting at the London Academy of Diplomacy. Finally, Papadopoulos' recollection is also consistent with handwritten notes from a journal that he kept at that time. Now we're going to page 92. Those notes, which are reprinted in part below, appear to refer to potential 2016 meetings in London with the representatives of the office of Putin and suggest that Fairs, Clovis, and Papadopoulos would attend without the official backing of the campaign. In fact, it says, quote, "no official letter, no message from Trump." Later communications indicate that Clovis determined that he, Clovis, could not travel. On August 15th, 2016, Papadopoulos emailed Clovis that he had received requests from multiple foreign governments, even Russia, in quotes, for, quote, "closed-door workshop consultations abroad," end quote, and asked whether there was still interest for Clovis, Fairs, and Papadopoulos to, quote, "go on that trip." Clovis copied Fairs in his response, which said he would not travel before the election, but that he would encourage Papadopoulos and Walid to make the trips if it was feasible. Page 93. Papadopoulos was dismissed from the Trump campaign in early October 2016 after an interview he gave to the Russian news agency Interfax generated adverse publicity. Subtitle F, Trump campaign knowledge of, quote, dirt. Papadopoulos admitted telling at least one individual outside of the campaign, specifically the then Greek foreign minister, about Russia's obtaining Clinton-related emails. In addition, a different foreign government informed the FBI that 10 days after meeting with Mifsud in late April 2016, Papadopoulos suggested that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the Trump campaign through the anonymous release of information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton. And then there's a parenthesis. This conversation occurred after the GRU spearphished Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta and stole his emails, and the GRU hacked into the DCCC and DNC. End of parenthesis. Such disclosures raised questions about whether Papadopoulos informed any Trump campaign official about the emails. When interviewed, Papadopoulos and the campaign officials who interacted with him told the prosecutor's office, the special prosecutor's office, that they could not recall Papadopoulos' sharing the information that Russia had obtained dirt on candidate Clinton in the form of emails, or that Russia could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information about Clinton. Papadopoulos stated that he could not clearly recall having told anyone on the campaign, and wavered about whether he accurately remembered an incident in which Clovis had been upset after hearing Papadopoulos tell Clovis that Papadopoulos thought, quote, they have her emails.
Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world. Today's report brought to you by GoatsForTheOld.goat.com and Loving What You Do, the new book by Ellen Ratner. On the line with us from Talk Media News is Doug Christian. Doug, welcome back to the program.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, Tom. I saw you the other day on Bill Maher's show. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a good time. Doug, what's up in the world right now? What's the latest news?
Well, there's this conflict with Iran, of course. That is, it's a problem of our own making. We had the GCPOA signed with the idea that this agreement would eventually would allow the more moderate wing of the Iranian political establishment. This would include people like Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif to gain control over people like Qasem Soleimani, who is the head of the Quds forces, or of course Khamenei, who is the supreme leader. And what this does, in fact, by getting us out of the GCPOA, is that it makes us it pushes the hardliners and actually emasculates the people that could be most moderating in control of our relationship with Iran.
Yeah, we were talking with Jamal Abdi about that from NIAC at the top of the hour. It's a scary thing. It also, sanctions have never ever worked anywhere in the world, as far as anybody can tell. All they do is make people pull together. When we impose sanctions on Cuba, people pull together behind Castro. We impose sanctions on Venezuela, people pull together around Chavez and Maduro. When we had functional sanctions during World War II, rationing and everything else, we pulled together. And Iran is doing this now. And you're right, they're pulling together around the right wing, the hard right, which is really, really tragic. What else is up, Doug?
Well, of course, there's the crisis at the border right now, and of course there's this running debate whether or not what AOC said when she called the camps, which children are left without any medicine or clothing or toiletries or toothbrushes, and are infected with lice, whether or not those are concentration camps. And of course, I don't know what we call them, but they're pretty horrible. And Mike.
Well, the origin of the term concentration camps is from a German word, which means bringing people to bring something together and concentrate it into one point. And so the concentration camps in Germany were not the death camps. Those were located outside of Germany, very intentionally by the Germans.
Poland.
So that right, in Poland and Holland and I think there might have been one in Czechoslovakia. But the concentration camps were separating people from society and concentrating them into one place. And that's exactly what we're doing with these refugees. I call them concentration
One of the things that I found most enlightening, and I would recommend to anybody to go to it, is to go to Dachau outside of Munich, because they restored the Dachau's concentration camp to kind of what it would have been like. Of course, without all the without the prisoners, but it gives you a sense of exactly what you talked about. Before Dachau it did become a killing camp later on. But at first, it was a concentration camp. Of course, people could be murdered randomly. Most were sent into slavery to work for companies such as BMW. But that's what they were. They were concentration camps. They were not killing camps at first. Those camps.
Yeah. And this just shows how ahistoric Americans are. How we never really. We don't do a deep dive into world history. We so fail to understand things, and the idea that there's so many people so outraged, they're using the word concentration camps. How could they use that word? Anyhow, Doug, moving along. What other news? Yeah, go for it.
Also, what I'd say is that, for instance, when I was at Dachau, one of the things you see a lot of were German school children. The schools teach history, which we're not being taught here in this country.
I lived there for a year. In fact, we lived about a half hour to an hour away from Dachau, and much closer to a much smaller concentration camp in the Frankenwald. And they actually, their kids learn all this stuff. Our kids don't even know that about the Native American genocide or the genuine horrors of slavery. Frankly, we're not teaching. I don't think we've ever taught that stuff in our schools.
Yeah, of course, because we have this kind of this maximalist view of American culture, and of course, American culture has done so many things. But as you've quoted in your books and Howard Zinn, there are we've had a lot of problems too.
Yeah, well, we've always defined American culture as white culture and Anglo-Saxon culture, and that's been one of our huge mistakes. But anyway, what else is happening in the world, Doug?
Well, of course, you know that Congress will be going off on break for the 4th of July recess for a week. And before they go, of course, Congress is working hard to try to reconcile bills between the House and the Senate, budget bills. Of course, that is the primary function, besides oversight, of Congress is budget. But of course, there are two very distinctive views about what the budget means right now. And right now, of course, what we're seeing is part of what's happening with the children is they're being used as political pawns to fund various portions of ICE, and they're doing this by saying, well, Democrats are not funding humanitarian aid.
Right. This is what Mike Pence said on TV, right? We can't give soap and toothbrushes to children because the Democrats won't give us the money. I mean, just lying through his teeth, this guy.
It's so blatantly political. And of course the problem is these are children after all. These are not political players. And to take advantage of such vulnerable people is outrageous, frankly.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Doug Christian with Talk Media News. Doug, thanks so much for dropping by today.
You bet.
It's great talking with you. And we'll be back with more of the Thom Hartmann Program right after this. We're going to get into rebranding the Democratic Party, following up on my last rant, and we'll be picking up your phone calls. More of the news of the day. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
It's the Mueller Report. We're on page 99. Denis Klimnitov, an employee of NES, the new economic school in Moscow, said that when Russians learned of Page's involvement in the Trump campaign in March 2016, the excitement was palpable. Weber recalled that in summer 2016, there was substantial interest in the Trump campaign in Moscow, and he felt that bringing a member of the campaign to the new school would be beneficial. Page was eager to accept the invitation to speak at the new school, and he sought approval from Trump campaign officials to make the trip to Russia. On May 16, 2016, while that request was still under consideration, Page emailed Clovis, J.D. Gordon, and Walid Fairs and suggested that candidate Trump take his place speaking at the commencement ceremony in Moscow. On June 19, 2016, Page followed up again to request approval to speak at the NES event and to reiterate that NES, quote, would love to have Mr. Trump speak at the annual celebration in Page's place. Campaign manager Corey Lewandowski responded the same day, saying, quote, if you want to do this, it would be outside of your role with the DJT for President campaign. I am certain Mr. Trump will not be able to attend, end quote. In early July 2016, Page traveled to Russia for the NES events. On July 5th, 2016, Denis Klimnitov, copying his brother Dmitry Klimnitov, emailed Maria Zakharova, the director of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs Information and Press Department, about Page's visit and his connection to the Trump campaign. Denis Klimnitov said in the email that he wanted to draw the Russian government's attention to Page's visit in Moscow. His message to Zakharova continued, quote, Page is Trump's advisor on foreign policy. He is a known businessman. He used to work in Russia. If you have any questions, I would be happy to help contact him, end quote. Dmitry Klimnitov then contacted Russian Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov about Page's visit to see if Peskov wanted to introduce Page to any Russian government officials. The following day, Peskov responded to what appears to have been the same Denis Klimnitov-Zakharova email thread. Peskov wrote, quote, I have read about Page. Specialists say he is far from being the main one, so I better not initiate a meeting in the Kremlin, end of quote. On July 7, 2016, Page delivered the first of his two speeches in Moscow at NES. In the speech, Page criticized the U.S. government's foreign policy toward Russia, stating that, quote, Washington and other Western capitals have impeded potential progress through their often hypocritical focus on ideas such as democratization, inequality, corruption, and regime change. On July 8, 2016, Page delivered a speech during the NES commencement. After Page delivered his commencement address, Russian Deputy Prime Minister and NES board member Arkady Dvorkovich spoke at the ceremony and stated that the sanctions the United States had imposed on Russia had hurt the NES. Page and Dvorkovich shook hands at the commencement ceremony, and Weber recalled that Dvorkovich made statements to Page about working together in the future. The rest of that paragraph has been redacted, deleted by Bill Barr. Page said that during his time in Moscow, he met with friends and associates he knew from when he lived in Russia, including Andrei Baranov, a former Gazprom employee who had become the head of investor relations at Rosneft, a Russian energy company. Page stated that he and Baranov talked about immaterial, non-public information. Page believed he and Baranov discussed Rosneft President Igor Sechin, and he thought Baranov might have mentioned the possibility of a sale of a stake in Rosneft in passing. We're on page 101 now. Page recalled mentioning his involvement in the Trump campaign with Baranov, although he did not remember details of the conversation. Page also met with individuals from Tatneft, a Russian energy company, to discuss possible business deals, including having Page work as a consultant. On July 8, 2016, while he was in Moscow, Page emailed several campaign officials and stated that he would send, quote, a readout soon regarding some incredible insights and outreach I've received from a few Russian legislators and senior members of the presidential administration here. On July 9th, 2016, Page emailed Clovis, writing in pertinent part, quote, Russian Deputy Prime Minister and NES board member Arkady Dvorkovich also spoke before the event. In a private conversation, Dvorkovich expressed strong support for Mr. Trump and a desire to work together toward devising better solutions in response to the vast range of current international problems. Based on feedback from a diverse array of other sources in the presidential administration, it was readily apparent that this sentiment was widely held at all levels of government, end quote. Despite these representations to the campaign, and then the rest of that paragraph has been blocked off by Bill Barr. The office was unable to obtain additional evidence or testimony about who Page may have met or communicated with in Moscow. Thus, Page's activities in Russia, as described in his emails with the campaign, were never fully explained. Page 102. D. Later campaign work. This is still Carter Page. Later campaign work and removal from the campaign. In July 2016, after returning from Russia, Page traveled to the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. While there, Page met Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. That interaction is described in Volume 1. Page later emailed campaign officials with feedback he said he received from ambassadors he had met at the convention. And he wrote that Ambassador Kislyak was very worried about candidate Clinton's worldviews. And then the rest of that paragraph is redacted by Bill Barr. It's the Mueller Report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It's the Mueller Report. This is Page.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This hour, by the way, brought to you by XChair. XChairTom.com is their website. We're broadcasting live from Bellevue College's campus, their television studios, and in collaboration with 91.3 FM KBCS, which is part of Bellevue College. And had a great time last night. It was a fascinating event. In this hour, I want to get into this issue that I brought up a little bit. I started to rant about this in the previous hour. How do you call what Elizabeth Warren, what Bernie Sanders, what several of the other progressive members of progressive candidates for president, and certainly the Democratic Progressive Caucus, and it's not actually even the Democratic Progressive Caucus, it's the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Republicans are welcome to join it, but there's no progressive Democrats left anymore. There actually used to be, Republicans. There actually used to be progressive Republicans. No more. But why do we call this, the positions that are being held by Democrats, fringe or radical or socialist? You get these multi-millionaires on the big television networks, and particularly in the cable networks, talking about the far left and the radical left and all this kind of thing. The far left, really? To the best of my knowledge, we are the FDR left. We are the LBJ left. Now, the problem with saying LBJ left, unfortunately, is that Lyndon Johnson also had this war in Vietnam going, and I was one of those people out in the streets chanting, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids have you killed today, right? It took a long time for me to essentially forgive LBJ, and I've never forgiven him for the war, but to allow the war part of LBJ's legacy to stop overshadowing the progressive part of LBJ's legacy, because LBJ brought us the Civil Rights Act, he brought us the Voting Rights Act, he brought us a genuine attempt at producing, racial equality in the United States. It was during his administration, I believe, that the Equal Rights Amendment was first rolled out. I might be wrong on that, but the idea that we're all here together, we're all in this together, we're all working on the, was something that came out, that really came to the fore during the Kennedy, Johnson, Humphrey administrations. Kennedy, of course, was assassinated in '63. LBJ became president. He got reelected or got elected in '64. And then, things just, got very messy with Vietnam. But he also brought us Medicare. He brought us Medicaid. And these were not things that LBJ just said, hey, let's just do this. This is a great idea. These were actually things that Franklin Roosevelt had proposed 30 years earlier in the 1930s. Actually, 20 years earlier, from the 1960s, it was the 1940s that Franklin Roosevelt gave his, Second Bill of Rights speech, where he said housing should be a right, a job should be a right. And what that means, if something's a right, it means that the government provides it if the so-called free market, if the economy of capitalism fails to. So, we had capitalist fire departments for a long time in the United States. My dad grew up in Chicago. Back in the 1920s and 1930s. And I don't know if it was then or if it was before then, but there was a time in Chicago, my dad told me this story, where if you didn't have the right fire department's shield on the front door of your house and your house caught on fire, or if you didn't have any shield at all, if you weren't paying a monthly VIG to the for-profit fire department, your house would burn down. And I think that the Great Chicago Fire might have rebooted that. Frankly, I might be completely wrong about this because, again, this is just a story my dad told me. But I know that all over the country there were these for-profit fire departments. And we figured out, there are some things that the for-profit world does well, right? They make blue jeans, they make computers, but they don't build roads very well. They don't run fire departments very well. God forbid they should run our police departments or our Army. Which, by the way, about half of our military budget now is going to for-profit corporations, which is mind-boggling when you consider how large our military budget is. But why do we allow, and by the way, if every time one of these, I almost said a word you can't say on the air, every time one of these idiots on cable TV or even regular network television says, the far left or the fringe or the radical left or the socialists or the democratic socialists. Every time they say that, why do we not push back on social media? Why are we not raising hell on Twitter and saying, no, we are FDR Democrats. We are trying to bring back the legacy of Franklin Roosevelt that built not just the Democratic Party, that built the American middle class. Pure and simple. The American middle class was decimated under the practices of Harding and Coolidge and Hoover in the 1920s. Warren Harding ran for president in 1920. The top tax rate at that point in time, left over from Woodrow Wilson, was 91%. It kicked in at 91% after about $3 million in annual income in today's dollars, as I recall. But at some point, it kicked in. It was 91%. And Harding... And there was government regulation of the marketplace. The Panic of 1896 was one of the things that really led to this. There was this massive crash in the late 1890s that people in the 1920s were still remember. In fact, 1919, 1920, it was pretty much everybody remembered. And so there had been some really serious regulations put on banks and put on stockbrokers and things like this. And there was a lot of talk about creating what we now know as the Fed, which came about, as I recall, in 1913. And they had the Republicans using what today we would call Reaganomics had just devastated America. So Warren Harding, he ran on two things. Number one, lower taxes. And he did. He dropped them down to 25% when he became president. And number two, more business in government, less government in business, which is deregulation and privatization, or privatization and deregulation, actually, the way I just laid it out. And what did it bring us? It brought us the Roaring 20s. Well, what was the Roaring 20s? Well, people think that the Roaring 20s was when everybody got richer. Actually, working people during the Roaring 20s saw their incomes go down, just like now. The really rich made a fortune, and the stock market exploded. And we are living in the echo of that right now. So why don't we say this? Robert Reich laid this out. It's just absolutely brilliant. He's like, because these guys who are saying, it's the fringe, it's the radicals, it's the hard left, the far left, right? Talking as if we're not the center of America. You may call me whatever you want. You can call me a democratic socialist. You can call it doesn't matter. But the positions that I'm talking about, just consider this. 76% of Americans want higher taxes on the super rich. 60% of Americans want a wealth tax on fortunes of over $50 million. And this was a poll from Fox News. 70% of Americans want Medicare for all. 60% of Republicans support allowing anyone under 65 to buy into Medicare. 92% of Americans want lower prescription drug prices. Over 70% think we should be able to buy drugs imported from Canada if our federal government can't get their act together. Meanwhile, 60% of Americans, 60% support college-free tuition. People, that Bernie Sanders, he's a socialist. No, he's an American. 62% of Americans think not only climate change is man-made, but we damn well better be doing something about it. 84% of Americans think money has too much influence in politics. 77% of Americans support limits on campaign spending, and that includes 71% of Republicans. And these are not weird left-leaning polls. You know how Fox, they pull some right-wing poll out where they only poll people on, Fox News or something. This is America. America wants FDR Democrats. America wants a return to a growing middle class, and at this point I'd say a shrinking billionaire class. But America's not getting it, in large part because of the Supreme Court and Citizens United and all that stuff. And we've got some serious work to do here, my friends.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. I want to rant about the Fed a little bit, and we'll be picking up your calls as well. We've got an awful and large number of topics on the book. Stick around. We'll be right back. Thank you, and welcome back. Let's see here. Alex in Milton, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. I was thinking the other day about this problem with Iran, and it was really disturbing me because it doesn't seem like Trump is the sort of person that possesses the ability to walk away from a situation like this or to negotiate out. He seems to think you can only win or lose in these situations. And then it also bugs because after 9/11, when we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, the world was with us at least. We just got attacked. Now we've alienated.
Well, wait a minute. The world was with us on Afghanistan, not on Iraq. But
well, no, nobody wanted that until he gave that ultimatum. You better get out, or we're coming to get you.
Yeah.
But now the world is all alienated against us. You think they're going to sit by and let us just freaking go in and take on Iraq or Iran? And after we've already done things to Iran, like the sanctions and with the Shah, if we go in there, those people will never forgive us. There will be no forgetting.
Well, and Mossadegh, I mean, Iran had a democratically elected administration, and I think it was 1956 the CIA went in and overthrew him and installed the Shah of Iran. I mean, this and the Iranians know this, by the way, Alex.
Yeah, and they will never forgive us if we go in there. They will not forget either, and there is no win. Yeah. And it will instantly radicalize all kinds of Muslims who before still gave us the benefit of the doubt. If we go in there, it will make so many enemies, and there's no win. We can't go in there and walk away with any. There's no way we can go in there and walk out with a win. It's not possible. Yeah. And the only thing I thought of that could maybe help us is if Putin steps in and tells Trump, hey, you better stop this crap. Because that's the only guy he's afraid of. And I thought, oh, my God, now that's what I'm relying on, that maybe Putin can scare him into not doing it. But I'm just terrified of this Iran stuff, because if we go in there, things are going to be so bad that people have no clue, and it's getting close.
Yeah, and Russia is right to the north of Iran, and Russia is one of Iran's allies.
That's the only hope we have, because he seems to be the only one that scares Trump, that Trump will listen to.
It's Alex, I can't disagree with you. I mean, it's breathtaking to think that Vladimir Putin might save us and prevent World War III. But I mean, yeah. It hadn't occurred to me before. Thank you for that, Alex. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, because Putin appears to be the only guy that Trump listens to, and the only guy that Trump trusts.
And the only other options are so bad. The more I thought about it, I'm like, if we go militarily, we have nobody who's going to have our back. It's like friggin' it's reminding me of friggin' the Weimar Republic after Hitler took over, and just like.
Yeah.
He went nuts.
Where all their allies deserted them, and then he started attacking all his former allies. And let's also remember that Russia has a nuclear arsenal that's very similar to our own. I mean, between us and Russia, we could sterilize the planet. I mean that literally. I mean, we could wipe off. We could create a nuclear winter that would create an extinction event that would rival the previous 5 over the last 1.5 billion, 2 billion years of geologic history.
Yeah, and instead of talking about it, all we hear is that Trump saved 150 Iranians. He didn't save anyone. He didn't do that.
Yeah. So, amen. Alex, thanks a lot for the call. So what we need to be doing right now, oh man, it pains me to say this. Can you tweet Vladimir Putin? I don't know. But, Mr. Putin, please speak with Mr. Trump. We'll be right back.
Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, doing our show live from the Bellevue College campus television studio and 91.3 FM KBCS, our affiliate here in the Seattle area. Bellevue is, kind of suburban Seattle, I guess. Maybe the people in Bellevue wouldn't say it that way, but we're right next door. And we had a great time last night. Tomorrow night, we'll be in San Francisco. We're actually in Berkeley at the First Church. And looking forward to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. I did my rant on policy, and we can talk about that. We can talk about Iran. We just had a caller who raised a really interesting thing. He said basically, the only guy out there that Donald Trump listens to is Vladimir Putin. And Putin doesn't want us to attack Iran. Russia is an ally of Iran's. So we find ourselves in this very bizarre situation where literally the thing that might prevent World War III is Putin calling Trump and saying, "Don't you dare, buddy." And so do we need to reach out to President Putin and say, "Would you please talk some sense into our president?" It's just a kind of a shocking thought, but that's what we've come to in this country. Isn't that amazing? I also wanted to talk about the Fed. If we don't have an independent Fed, then our country, our economy, which, of course, is our country in many ways. I mean, it defines the quality of life, certainly, in our economy, is essentially at the mercy of a dictator. The Federal Reserve, it looks right now like Jay Powell is going along with Donald Trump. Now, in Jay Powell's defense, our Fed is not the only Federal Reserve or, equivalent central bank in the world that is engaging in what I think is extremely dangerous stimulative efforts, right? The European Central Bank, the ECB, I'm not sure if they're fully into negative territory now. I think they may be. A number of individual countries their bonds have gone into negative territory. So if you want to buy the bonds of some of these countries, you actually have to pay them rather than them paying you. Like if you buy a U.S. government bond right now, the government pays you 2% for basically you're loaning them your money. But in some countries in Europe now, if you buy a bond, you have to pay the government in order to have the privilege of holding on to the bond. This has literally never happened before. Literally. I mean, that's how incredibly weird this all is. And what a screaming alarm bell in the night, to paraphrase Jefferson, this should be. And here in the United States, we're at 2% more or less. Trump is out tweeting and yelling about how it has to go lower than that, because as the interest rates go down, borrowing costs for consumers and for businesses decline. And so what happens? Businesses go into debt and consumers go into debt. Consumer debt right now is at $14 trillion. I don't have the numbers for corporate debt right now, but it's in the trillions. And if interest rates go up, a lot of that debt is going to be unsustainable. People will no longer be able to pay their debts, which will create a disaster on the level of 1930. And so, the Fed is like freaking out. What do we do? If we don't stimulate the economy artificially, this is an artificial stimulus. If we don't just keep, these low interest rates and keep pouring money into the economy, then, we're looking literally at disaster. So, and Trump is pushing for that. He says, think of what the economy could have been if the Fed had gotten it right. This is one of his tweets. Thousands of points higher on the Dow and GDP in the 4s and 5s. Now they stick like a stubborn child when we need rate cuts and easing to make up for what other countries are doing against us. They blew it. That's Trump's thing. Well, we've seen countries where the politicians took control of their central banks. Zimbabwe is a great example. It's 10,000% inflation. Right? Because the president says to the central bank, you will stimulate the economy. Turkey, Erdogan did this. He took control of his Fed. And his currency has just disintegrated in large part because of that. He's trying to stimulate his economy. It happens all over the world, or it has happened all over the world. And it almost always, well, not almost always, I would say it always. Maybe you know of an exception to this rule. I, frankly, have been unable to find one. Louise and I did a fair amount of research on this morning when we were doing our show prep for today's program. Find any country in the world where when their central bank has been taken over by their politicians, rather than remaining independent, that it hasn't led to massive inflation and an economic disaster as a result of sustained stimulus beyond what's appropriate. Add to that the fact that when the economy does go into recession, the only tool that the Fed has is to pour more money into the economy by lowering interest rates and frankly by buying so-called toxic assets, which is what happened with the TARP program. But the Fed can only do that if interest rates are high enough that you can lower them, right? I mean, interest rates were 5% and 6% in 2007 before we went into the great Republican George Bush crash of 2007, 2008. And the way that Barack Obama and the Fed, frankly, Janet Yellen, got us out of that great crash was by lowering interest rates. Well, you lower interest rates when you're in a crash to get you out of it. But then you raise them again so that the next, this is business cycle, right? This is like, look, any economics textbook will tell you this. Capitalism has these business cycles. And when they go down, if you want to save your country, you've got to be able to lower interest rates, and you can't lower them if they're already at 2%. Anyhow, a lot to talk about. Back with your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We are broadcasting live from the Bellevue College campus television studios and 91.3 FM KBCS in Bellevue, Washington, near Seattle.
It's the Mueller report. We're on page 99. Denis Klimnitov, an employee of NES, the new economic school in Moscow, said that when Russians learned of Page's involvement in the Trump campaign in March 2016, the excitement was palpable. Weber recalled that in summer 2016, there was substantial interest in the Trump campaign in Moscow, and he felt that bringing a member of the campaign to the new school would be beneficial. Page was eager to accept the invitation to speak at the new school, and he sought approval from Trump campaign officials to make the trip to Russia. On May 16, 2016, while that request was still under consideration, Page emailed Clovis, J.D. Gordon, and Walid Fairs and suggested that candidate Trump take his place speaking at the commencement ceremony in Moscow. On June 19, 2016, Page followed up again to request approval to speak at the NES event and to reiterate that NES, quote, would love to have Mr. Trump speak at the annual celebration in Page's place. Campaign manager Corey Lewandowski responded the same day, saying, quote, if you want to do this, it would be outside of your role with the DJT for President campaign. I am certain Mr. Trump will not be able to attend, end quote. In early July 2016, Page traveled to Russia for the NES events. On July 5th, 2016, Denis Klimenitov, copying his brother Dmitry Klimenitov, emailed Maria Zakharova, the director of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs Information and Press Department, about Page's visit and his connection to the Trump campaign. Denis Klimenitov said in the email that he wanted to draw the Russian government's attention to Page's visit in Moscow. His message to Zakharova continued, quote, Page is Trump's advisor on foreign policy. He is a known businessman. He used to work in Russia. If you have any questions, I would be happy to help contact him, end quote. Dmitry Klimenitov then contacted Russian press secretary Dmitry Peskov about Page's visit to see if Peskov wanted to introduce Page to any Russian government officials. The following day, Peskov responded to what appears to have been the same Denis Klimenitov-Zakharova email thread. Peskov wrote, quote, I have read about Page. Specialists say he is far from being the main one, so I better not initiate a meeting in the Kremlin, end of quote. On July 7, 2016, Page delivered the first of his two speeches in Moscow at NES. In the speech, Page criticized the U.S. government's foreign policy toward Russia, stating that, quote, Washington and other Western capitals have impeded potential progress through their often hypocritical focus on ideas such as democratization, inequality, corruption, and regime change. On July 8, 2016, Page delivered a speech during the NES commencement. After Page delivered his commencement address, Russian Deputy Prime Minister and NES board member Arkady Dvorkovich spoke at the ceremony and stated that the sanctions the United States had imposed on Russia had hurt the NES. Page and Dvorkovich shook hands at the commencement ceremony, and Weber recalled that Dvorkovich made statements to Page about working together in the future. The rest of that paragraph has been redacted, deleted by Bill Barr. Page said that during his time in Moscow, he met with friends and associates he knew from when he lived in Russia, including Andrei Baranov, a former Gazprom employee who had become the head of investor relations at Rosneft, a Russian energy company. Page stated that he and Baranov talked about immaterial, non-public information. Page believed he and Baranov discussed Rosneft President Igor Sechin, and he thought Baranov might have mentioned the possibility of a sale of a stake in Rosneft in passing. We're on page 101 now. Page recalled mentioning his involvement in the Trump campaign with Baranov, although he did not remember details of the conversation. Page also met with individuals from Tatneft, a Russian energy company, to discuss possible business deals, including having Page work as a consultant. On July 8, 2016, while he was in Moscow, Page emailed several campaign officials and stated that he would send, quote, a readout soon regarding some incredible insights and outreach I've received from a few Russian legislators and senior members of the presidential administration here. On July 9, 2016, Page emailed Clovis, writing in pertinent part, quote, Russian Deputy Prime Minister and NES board member Arkady Dvorkovich also spoke before the event. In a private conversation, Dvorkovich expressed strong support for Mr. Trump and a desire to work together toward devising better solutions in response to the vast range of current international problems. Based on feedback from a diverse array of other sources in the presidential administration, it was readily apparent that this sentiment was widely held at all levels of government, end quote. Despite these representations to the campaign, and then the rest of that paragraph has been blocked off by Bill Barr. The office was unable to obtain additional evidence or testimony about who Page may have met or communicated with in Moscow. Thus, Page's activities in Russia, as described in his emails with the campaign, were never fully explained. Page 102. D. Later campaign work, this is still Carter Page, later campaign work and removal from the campaign. In July 2016, after returning from Russia, Page traveled to the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. While there, Page met Russian Ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. That interaction is described in Volume 1. Page later emailed campaign officials with feedback he said he received from ambassadors he had met at the convention. And he wrote that Ambassador Kislyak was very worried about candidate Clinton's worldviews. And then the rest of that paragraph is redacted by Bill Barr. It's the Mueller Report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I may be coming to your city soon on our book tour for The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. I'll be in New York, Washington, D.C., Portland, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, and Minneapolis. Here I come. More information is available at thomhartmann.com.
And we've already done New York and D.C. and Los Angeles this weekend, and last night was Town Hall in Seattle. Tomorrow night I'll be in San Francisco, actually in Berkeley at First Church. Friday I'll be in Chicago at Frugal Muse in Darien, and Saturday in Minneapolis at Next Chapter Booksellers in St. Paul. Just quick FYI. So let's pick up some phone calls here. We've got so much going on, and I always love people who disagree with me. Lewis, it's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It says here you want to disagree with me about college. Make your case, sir.
Sure. Hey, Tom, how's it going? It's been a while. One thing, last time I talked to you, you said that IRS can only audit you 3 years in a row, and that's incorrect. It's a quick look up. It can audit you every year of your life.
Okay.
Now,
I stand corrected.
Sure. The thing is
I took that, by the way, from a news report. I think it was the New York Times, which was debunking Trump's claim that he's been continuously audited since he started his campaign. But you may be right, Lewis. I'm not sure. I thought I read it in the New York Times. Whenever I talked about it on the air, I had the article in front of me. Yeah, okay, so maybe you don't believe the New York Times. But anyhow, why should we not have free college?
Because, for one, the biggest thing of all would be it simply devalues college. Harvard's not going to let someone from a Milwaukee school with a 3.0 GPA get into their school.
Nobody's suggesting Harvard should be free, Lewis. I'm not suggesting Harvard should be free, because Harvard's not a public university. It's not funded with public funds. Colleges that are paid for with public funds, Michigan State. I said state and public institutions, public colleges, public universities, public junior colleges. They should all be free of tuition.
We'll move on from that. Some people just don't belong. I said we'll move on from that. Some people just don't belong in college, and if you make it free, they'll be wasting their time and our time and money as well. Also,
that's why you have college admission exams, Lewis. I mean, it's really pretty simple stuff. It's just people shouldn't have to go into debt to go to college. You've got an entire generation that's getting married 10, 15 years later than they would. They're starting families. They can't afford a house. You've got over 70% of millennials in China right now own their own homes. And I don't remember the number in the United States, but it's a hell of a lot lower than that. Why is that? Because college is free in China.
They're ignoring
Lewis?
admission. Yeah, they're ignoring admission exams, SATs. We've just gone through this, Tom. I don't know where you've been. But then there's another big problem. Can you hear me?
Something else you want to argue with me about? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, the reality is, let's get down to the real reality. You got a hell of a lot of baby boomers that paid for their college and worked several jobs to do it, maybe including you, I think. And they're not going to just say, hey, we're going to let these kids get college for free. It just isn't going to happen.
Oh, I think they absolutely will, for the same reason that we have primary education for free. We want to invest in an educated workforce. The reason, Lewis, why the United States in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and the early 80s, the reason why this country led the world in innovation, why we invented the transistor, why we invented the integrated circuit, why we invented Velcro, why we invented television, why we invented all these things, was because we had all these people who went to college for free after World War II on the GI Bill. And now we're lagging behind China, literally. China has, free or very, very cheap college, depending on which kind of college and where do you want to go. And the United States doesn't. And China now is registering more patents every year than the United States and has been for several years. And we're sliding back. And why are we sliding back? Because all those people who go to college for free or cheap enough, right? When I went to college, I think it was like $200 a semester, something like that at Michigan State University back in the 60s. And you could earn that, and I did, working in a gas station or Bob's Big Boy as a dishwasher. That's what I did. But those people who had those educations,
Tom,
they're dying out.
You bring up another point. China has mandatory service for their young adults. They don't just get college for free. They have to spend 2 years in the service. So
Well, Lewis, there you and I agree.
Yeah.
I think that what we should do in the United States is we should have a national service program. After you graduate from high school, you can choose. Do you want to go to work for a year in a nonprofit organization with a stipend? You're going to actually earn some money, and maybe we can pay for housing, something like that. This is what Germany was doing in the 1980s when I lived there. I don't know if they still are, but it's what they were doing when I lived there. And in fact, the place where I worked or lived, there was a health clinic associated with it, medical clinic, and there were a bunch of young guys there who, instead of going in the Army because they were conscientious objectors, they ended up working in this hospital essentially, and in exchange for 1 year of service to your country, which it's a rite of passage, which is psychologically a really important thing for people as they're entering adulthood. In exchange for that, you get free college, basically for the rest of your life, all the way to a PhD. I'm all in favor of doing that in the United States. And by the way, the other, a certain percentage of those young people are going to sign up for the draft, going to the military, which I think we really, really need. Because when you have a military that is entirely volunteer, what you end up with is a military filled with either people who are just gung-ho yahoos who want a war, or people who are there because they're trying to escape desperate poverty. And neither of those are good reasons to build an army. And if your army is entirely made up of people who are trying to escape poverty and people who love to, kill and maim and blow up things, you've got a problem. And frankly, I think we have a serious problem. Lewis, I'm over it with the conversation. Thanks for the call. Greg in Webster, South Dakota. Hey, Greg, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, Tom, first off, on the labeling, I think it's a mistake for us to engage in a mud-throwing contest with Trump because that's what he wants. He comes out.
What is the mud you're referring to?
Well, when he comes out, like the other day, and calls us the Democrat socialist extremists, I think it's a waste of our time to engage with him on that.
I agree. But when Chuck Todd calls us that, I don't think it's a waste of our time to engage with it. When Donnie Deutsch calls us that, I don't think it's a waste of our time to say, no, sir, you're wrong. This is an American tradition. Franklin Roosevelt pioneered. Frankly, Thomas Jefferson built the first free college in the United States. It's called the University of Virginia. And he demanded that it be tuition free. And it was for a long, long time. Abraham Lincoln found 56 places in the United States where there was enough land that the federal government owned that he could build a college there and give that land to the universities so that they could work that land, whether it was lumbering, in the case of Michigan State in East Lansing, it was agriculture. There's still, to this day, there's fields of corn and stuff. They're doing all kinds of ag work there, so that they could make enough money that their students could go to college for free. It was called the land-grant college system. It was Republican Abraham Lincoln who instituted this. And so when these fools on television start saying that we're the weird socialists, I'm like, don't you know? I mean, don't you know what Jefferson did? Don't you know what Lincoln did? Don't you know what Franklin Roosevelt did? Where the hell did you learn history?
No, they don't, because they learned history
you're right.
from watching somebody like Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, tragically.
I totally agree with you about free state schools. That absolutely should be done. But what I am talking about, and maybe that's one of the things we should label ourselves. We're the party that wants Medicare for all. We're the party that wants tuition-free schools. But when Trump calls us the Democrat socialist extremists, the best reply is, like you said, no, we're not. But we can't give everybody a history lesson.
I think the best reply is screw him. You know, I am no longer concerned, and I don't think any of us should be, with the tender sensibilities of snowflake Republicans, including the one who's sitting in the White House.
Oh, exactly.
It's just, you know, yeah. So, Greg, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Mike in Palatine, Illinois. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
First, I just wanted to say that Stephanie said this morning she had a great time this weekend in Los Angeles, and while you were backstage, you wrote 4 more books. I don't know if there's any truth to that or not.
Did she talk about my unmade bed?
Yes, she did. She said that you had on bed to air it out so the mites die or something to that extent.
It was so funny. I was staying with George and Peggy DiCaprio, Leo's dad, and I was staying at their house, and Stephanie came over, and Peggy was showing her around the house, which included the room that I was staying in, and I hadn't made my bed. And Stephanie was like, "Oh, you don't make your bed, I'm going to out you on television or on tomorrow on the radio," and I'm like. And Peggy speaks up and she says, "No, you shouldn't make your bed, because if you don't air it out, if you air it out, it kills the dust mites, and so you're supposed to air it out. And if you don't air it out, if you make your bed, it's unhealthy." And so, I think I'm winning the argument, but I Googled it, and just Google, should I make my bed? It's pretty shocking. Millions of dust mites a night. Anyhow, back to you, Mike.
It was great, but if I could bring up a point, I wanted to bounce this off of you. Up you there, Tom?
Yeah, I'm listening. And we've only got about 30 seconds, so quick one, please.
Okay, on Friday, Chris Murphy said on MSNBC.
Hey, Mike, I just sucked that whole thing up. If you can hold on, I will pick you back up in 4 minutes, okay? Because we never even got to your topic. I'm sorry, talking about dust mites and making your bed and stuff. And yeah, I don't make my bed, because I always thought you should let your bed air out. But maybe, and actually, like I said, duck, go it. Anyhow, we'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're live at Bellevue College's campus's television studios and 91.3 FM KBCS in Bellevue, Washington, near Seattle. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Justin in Runnymede, New Jersey. There's a famous Runnymede. I thought that was like in France or something. It was some great war. Is that where you live?
No, I honestly don't have much knowledge of what you're speaking about with that.
Okay. Yeah, I think it goes back to something like the Norman invasion or something. But anyhow, what's up?
Oh, okay. Hey, I just wanted to give you a call to talk about the Bernie's plan with college education and making public colleges and universities tuition free. And actually, it kind of goes perfect with that caller you had on before, Lewis, talking about how all the reasons he didn't agree with it. And one of the things that I noticed right away as soon as he unveiled his plan was you're hearing people say, well, what about all the people who have already paid off their student debt? And how much that, if you follow that logic through with a lot of other issues, how little sense it makes. Talking about going back to slavery, people who were slaves, and what do they have to say about people making slavery, illegal or ending it? If you follow that logic through with pretty much anything, it just completely falls flat, and it's just making me want to bang my head against the wall hearing it.
Yeah, I feel your pain, Justin. So, yeah, I think you're right. So, bottom line here, we put you in the list of supporting not just Bernie's education plan. I mean, he's got one specific one. Elizabeth Warren has a slightly different one, but it's kind of a variation on that. And a number of the other progressives are moving in that direction, right?
Yeah. Well, that was my other issue was with not an issue, so more so because I do really like Elizabeth Warren and I liked her plan. But just from a policy perspective and a political perspective, I think it just makes more sense to go into the bargaining table with the full loaf of bread. And I feel like that's what Bernie's plan is. It's the full loaf. And I feel like starting in the middle, it just sets you up for failure.
Yeah, I'm with you. Jim Hightower wrote a brilliant book back, it must be 10, 15 years ago now. And the title of it, and it was about, being a real progressive. And the title of it was The Only Thing in the Middle of the Road Are Dead Armadillos and Yellow Stripes. And it's just like, that's true. Justin, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I wanted to point out something that in the early 90s, Luntz and Newt Gingrich did this thing where they, every time that the Democrats were mentioned in the media, they would put a pejorative in front of it. So it would be dangerous Democrats, socialist Democrats, pie in the sky Democrats. They'd always put a pejorative in front.
You can still Google that, by the way, David. He had a word list. It was Newt Gingrich's word list. I wrote about it in one of my books, and it's still floating around out there. And he had positive words for Republicans, by the way.
And that is what you're hearing. And of course, you know, this whole thing with this, you know, they always talk about the fuzzy-headed liberal Ivy League thinking, and it's like, well, you can't be any more fuzzy league pie in the sky than basing economics off of a second-rate science fiction writer. In other words, Ayn Rand, using that as your basis for economic theory.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And not to mention Art Laffer, who is getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom for writing on a napkin that there's this curve where as taxes go up, you know, revenue goes down somehow. It's like very strange. David, thank you. Very well said. We'll be and if where you were going with that is the Democrats need to get more strategic about their use of language. Amen. I completely agree. In 2008, I wrote a book called Cracking the Code, which is entirely about messaging with language, how we use language to message. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Paul in Cary, North Carolina. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, man. Hey, Tom. Great show, by the way. And I just wanted to say that that guy Lewis is an idiot. I just want to get that out there. Wow. I can't believe it. That's crazy. Yeah. But the topic I wanted to hear your opinion on is I hear a lot of people talking, specifically Bill Maher. I believe he said that he don't believe that Trump will leave after the 2020 election. And I just wanted to get I'm predicting that I believe Mr. Trump is going to, if he loses that election, he isn't going to leave. In fact, I think he's going to cause a divisive effort to get his base riled up to where they will probably hit the streets or cause some type of chaos that will say, no, we want this guy to be the president. Like, he'll kind of force the issue, but in a subtle well. What do you think about that?
I'm very concerned about it, Paul. I am very, very concerned about it. In this book, The Turner Diaries, that animated Tim McVeigh and an entire generation of right-wing terrorists. This book came out in the 1970s, and this guy wanted to turn America back to its white Anglo-Saxon roots, right? And which is language that you'll hear from these white supremacists right now. And so what he did in this novel, this is a novel, but it's a novel that's been read by all these guys, right? And in fact, if you go back and you look at a lot of these mass killers who are motivated by this kind of thing, the Turner Diaries is part of their collection. In this book, the hero of the book blows up a federal building in Oklahoma City. The response to that from the federal government, whoever was president at the time, decides, okay, enough of this already, we're going to put an end to this, and clamps down on people having access to guns and starts sending out the federal police, the FBI and whatnot, going door to door, taking people's guns. In response to that, all the good white Christian gun owners rise up against the government, overthrow the government, start a mass slaughter of people of color and Jews. And at the end of the novel, the last guy standing is, or all the white people are the last ones standing with their guns. And this bizarre fantasy is widely shared in right-wing circles. And if Donald Trump were to refuse to leave the White House after he loses, or if he does leave the White House because the Secret Service says, hey, you want to leave or you want to go to jail? Or, if he does leave the White House, what I think is a more likely scenario, Paul, frankly, is that he will leave the White House and then he will get his own platform. He'll get his own show on Fox. He'll become, he'll have the Twitter. He'll have his followers. He'll be doing rallies all over the country. He's going to launch a movement very similar to the way that the National Socialist movement was launched in the late 1920s in Germany. And that's my opinion of what's going to happen.
Exactly.
And I fear that this could lead us right into a civil war or into fascism.
Yes, sir, and I thank you for that. But I'm saying I want to make that. I'm gonna call it now. I mean, when 2016 election, I was one of the only other few other than Bill Maher that agreed and said I believed that he was going to win that election because of being as a brown person with Asian and Hispanic background. Just watching from a third perspective, this country has. I didn't come to this country being brought by my stepfather, who is white. And he told me, he's like, hey, you come here, you have opportunity. And I've taken advantage of that. But watching what's going on is very scary to see that people are okay with what's going on. And they just, I feel like they're just standing by, just kind of waiting for that kind of like the hammer to drop or some hero or some Avenger to show up. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think we have to stand up as people who believe in the democratic system and say, hey, look, this shit ain't going to fly. We need to take this.
Yeah, and Paul, we can't use language like that. I'm sorry, but spot on. It's we cannot allow that. John in Kenmore, Washington. Hey, John, thanks for listening to KBCS.
Hey,
what's up? You have the last minute, by the way, I think, of the show.
I'm not going to use any words that you can't broadcast. But anyway,
thank you.
I want to say I am a perfect example of this socialist education. I went to college in California when Ronald Reagan was governor between 1966 and 1974. I got a free education. I didn't pay a penny tuition, and we had that wild socialist governor, Ronald Reagan. That's an argument everybody.
Well, he ended that, though,
Reagan was governor. And sounds good.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so anyway, when people make that argument, we can just come back and say Reagan was governor of California, no tuition. How is that so socialist? Was Ronald Reagan a socialist?
But Ronald Reagan ended free education in California, did he not? Or did he just initiate the process that led to it being ended during the next governor? My recollection is that he
No,
in fact,
Jerry Brown was governor after, and he didn't. As far as I know, I graduated in '74, so. And that's the year.
Well, maybe it was when he was president that he was talking about that, because by that time in the 1980s, free college in California was pretty much gone. And Reagan was asked, shouldn't education be free? And he said, why should I have to pay taxes for young people who are protesting my policies?
He used to say that. I remember when and Senator Hayakawa was saying the same thing in those days. So
yeah, amazing stuff. John, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to KBCS. Thank you all for being with us today. Thanks to our studio audience here, our official peanut gallery. Yeah, great. And we'll be in San Francisco tomorrow. I'll be doing my show tomorrow and Wednesday from AM 910. And tomorrow night, I'll be in Berkeley at the First Church. So check that out. All the information's at thomhartmann.com. And there should be links to the event. If they're not, go over to 910 AM and their website. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It really does require all of us, you and me, participating. And by the way, it's therapeutic. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
I'm Luke Vargas.